hopefully this will help with some of the issues that have been happening. I know it's been working, but it hasn't been working as well as I'd like. This might be a little bit different. So in this, I actually want to address a question that I got in my Communal Shower subreddit, which I've been happy to say that that's been growing pretty fast. Every couple days, we get people joining every day, but then I'll get messages every day from people who say they found it and they're interested in it. And I got a question on there that was not really about communal showers so much as about capitalism, and I thought it was a pretty interesting one. It's one I've touched on tangentially before, but it was like probably 6 or 7 years ago, so I'm not going to fault anybody who didn't go back through the archives and find it to talk about it. So let me go ahead and put a link. I'm going to put a link to the subreddit in the description here so that people can read it. On there that was not, but it's an interesting question, so I wanted to talk about it. I really don't like. I replied to him, so he's got his response, and he already knows what I'm going to say. But when I think something's interesting, I definitely do want to make a video about it and talk about it, because that's kind of what this is for. So let me just go ahead and get this up. If it's working, go ahead and leave a comment so that I know that it's working. You never know until you get confirmation. So let's see, put the link, copy. Let's see. If you haven't seen, there are new episodes on the podcast as well. That's all free. So I encourage people to check that out. I do cover stuff a little bit more, I don't want to say academic, but more theoretical there than the stuff here. And obviously I'm not taking questions or anything, so it's a little bit more straightforward. So I can't say how long people have been telling me to do a podcast. It's been years. I think a large proportion of the people who watch the channel listen to it anyway, so I felt like it was finally time to do it after 9 years. But so I do encourage people to check that out and leave feedback too, because there's no comments on them, so I have no idea like what people think, what they like, what they don't like, all that kind of stuff. Let's see, go here, get this in there. I'll get to his comment here. It's a brief comment, but there's a lot to be said about it, so it's going to take me a minute or two to read it. This is always lovely when you got to do the logistics. Here we go. Let's save that. Boom. Awesome. Delete this. Delete this. All right, so should be all set. 2 viewers. All right, good. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and read this. So he writes, "It occurs to me that there might be an interesting angle for you to discuss on your YouTube channel." Oh, so I didn't even remember he wrote that, but I agree with him. This is an interesting thing. So, in a libertarian's world, and I believe this guy is not a libertarian who's asking this, in a libertarian's world, how best do you address marketplace failures pertaining to goods and services the consumer is reluctant for causes of shame, propriety, being the odd man out, etc., as applicable to communal showers or hell, fetish porn? But then he says, but porn is not as good as an analogy as it doesn't pertain to advocating for a shared accommodation of a certain style. Perhaps it could be advocacy for rather Spartan dormitories or colleges offering less privacy and convenience in exchange for lower costs. So yeah, so this is actually a really interesting question, and it's not one that economists debate too much, because there's I think, and not to be pedantic here, but the idea of a market failure is something where the supply of a good is not what people think it should be for some reason. So there'll be economists who will say that we should have whatever, maybe we should have so many bridges or so many roads or so many airlines, so many flights, and we have fewer than we should, and this is a market failure, that the producers of those goods are not producing as many as they should. Now, I have a problem with that, because the metrics they use to determine that something is a market failure are very often questionable. It's very question-begging. It's not always as simple, but I think a lot of times it is boiling down to someone just saying, I like X, and there isn't as much as X as I think that there should be, therefore the market has failed. When they're presuming that their personal preference is somehow normative or objective, and the failure of the producing capital class to provide for that is a problem, as they quote market failure. Now, this question is actually coming at it from the other end. What if people are not demanding as much as they should? And I think, again, I don't think this is, I don't consider that's not technically a market failure. If you just say, why don't people demand more stuff? Why aren't there more people, in this context, demanding communal showers, right? Shouldn't communal showers be more popular? They're not. It's because people aren't demanding them enough. Why aren't they? And isn't that a market failure? So let me read what I wrote. The supply for communal showers is way too high. That's a market failure. I'm going to read what I wrote here. It's not very long, I don't think. Okay, well, strictly speaking, I don't think that it's a market failure when consumers demand less of a good than they otherwise would because of internal conflict or wrestling with social norms. So let's say you kind of want to watch porn a lot, or maybe you want to hire a hooker a lot, but because you have moralistic reasons against it, or you feel shame about it because you're cheating on somebody, or it makes you feel dirty, or whatever else, you have an internal conflict about it, and so you don't order that hooker, or you don't whatever. That isn't there now less of that than there should be? And I think the answer is no. This is going to go straight back to human action and Mises, but you act on what you think is the best thing. So whatever the internal tumult is in your mind of, should I buy the pizza, should I not buy the pizza? Once you go to the action, you've said, okay, whatever debate there is inside, you are the aggregate decision that you've made from the point of a consumer is that you want to buy the pizza, or you don't want to buy the porn, or you want to join the gym, or you don't want to join the gym, or whatever it is. And we really can't fault the capital structure for replying or responding to what we actually want in terms of our actions versus what we internally secretly wish, but we debate about it and we end up not acting on it. I'm not going to fault the porn industry. Let's say a lot of people, I saw this interesting guy who was looking at Google searches, and he was saying that in India, many men Google search, can my wife breastfeed me? Okay, it's totally gross and weird, and it's apparently something that only happens in India for whatever reason. But let's say there isn't any breastfeeding porn out there because nobody is actually going out there to buy any. And I'm not going to blame the porn industry for not producing a product that people at the end of the day are not choosing to buy. And I'm not going to fault the market if there are, and he used examples of like porn and stuff, but this applies to anything, right? There's less pizza than there would be because a lot of people some of the times do not order pizza because they're worried about weight, or they're worried about how they feel, or they're into some diet that precludes it, or who knows. And a lot of people, and that's not just pizza, that's for everything. So the sphere of economics, we can look into the internal tumults into a person's mind. That's psychiatry and psychology, and that can be interesting, but that's not economics. Economics begins at the point where you make a decision. I'm going to get a subscription to Pornhub, or I'm going to find an escort or a hooker, or I'm going to join a gym that has a communal shower. So let me continue. So maybe if maybe I'd purchase more porn or hire more sex workers if only I could, if only I didn't feel ashamed. Isn't it really a market failure? The logic could apply towards almost every decision. I'd probably demand more pizza if I didn't have, if you can't tell, I like pizza. If I didn't have health and body image concerns, as a more anodyne example. Whatever tumult goes on into a decision from the point of view of Pareto optimization and market calculation, the action you take indicates the optimal possibility in your estimation, at least ex ante. There's always the possibility you make a choice and then later in hindsight you decide that was the wrong choice. But again, you can't really fault the market for responding to what you thought was your best choice at the time. Boiled down, this means that the most plausible assumption is that whatever people choose to do is probably in their best interest, at least as far as their own subjective values dictates. I realize that this conclusion doesn't sit well with many people. However, every alternative view relies on some alleged objective and external better options, in essence saying that the person doesn't really know what's in their best interests. They really should buy more pizza, hire more sex workers, or go to the gym more. However much I might have ideas about what might be better for a person, I only go so far as to persuade them. I do not think these objective best interest formulas are anywhere near as certain enough to justify coercion, and indeed, most are laughably simplistic and erroneous. I made a video a couple years ago called The Problem with Capitalism, which again, if you guys are interested, I do think that's one of my better videos and one that doesn't get a ton of views. Uh, whatever I expressed, uh, Wherever I express the idea that the biggest problem is that in capitalism you get what you want, I think this is really a very sobering, and it's wise for people to self-reflect on what they really want. However, their failures of personal insight are not repairable by external interventions and are not the failures of the market. It's the failure of the self. And that's basically all I said to him, and then he replied back. So he got the message. So to kind of unpack that, um, uh, I've seen this a lot actually, where people have their personal interests. They have products they like. Maybe they're a consumer of opera, maybe they're a consumer of a certain type of food, maybe they like a certain type of coffee, or they like sushi. And then they'll look and they're like, how come there's no sushi bars on the highway in Ohio? Or how come there's not enough operas? How come there's not enough classical music? That's one thing. You know, classical music is expensive to record live, and um, you know, there's not a huge catalog being expanded of it, and people say maybe there should be more of this. And um, then they say, well, the market failed because it's not providing as much as I think that it should, because these are products that I value. Or the alternative, another one that's kind of the inverse of that, is people who say, I don't value this, and the market's providing a lot of it. So in my case, I never watch porn. I never have gotten into porn. It's never done anything for me. Like, it's out there. It should be legal. I think it should be unrestricted and blah, blah, blah. But it just doesn't do anything for me. And I've never spent any money on it, and I never will. And I realize most people who use it don't spend any money on it either. But many people would then say, and this is gonna unavoidably sound self-righteous, and I'm sorry for that, but would say, I don't watch porn, so you shouldn't watch porn either, and the porn industry should be tiny. And I think that that is fundamentally a wrong view to take. That's a very conceited approach to think that your personal preferences supersede everybody else's, and it's very common among socialist thinking. It's very common among the people who want to plan society out, because it's much easier to plan and say, if you recognize that everybody is individual and they have a different value scale, and some people value their health and their habitation in different relative terms, right? There are some people who say, you know what, I want to have the best dwelling possible for the resources available, and then my healthcare can be minimal. And somebody else could say, I actually want to have the absolute best healthcare that I can, and I don't really care too much about what my habitation is. Neither one of those is right. They're both right in their subjective valuations and then the personal opinions. And the thing is, it's not like, oh, well, there's just two examples. There's an infinite number. No two people are going to have identical valuations on every topic. So what makes that very difficult is then if you were going to have a government plan that says provide this for everybody, it's kind of based on making rough assumptions. And I remember in the early days of Facebook, one of my early socialist counterparts who I'd argue with a lot would come up with these formulas and say, you know, 30% of your income should go to healthcare, and 30% should go to housing, and 30% should be split between, you know, and he was a smart guy. I don't want to like say he's an idiot or anything, but you know, that might be a correct relative valuation for him and maybe for some other people, but not for everybody, and that's not an objectively correct one. So again, you can't really blame the market because not everyone shares your preferences and gives you exactly what you think that it should, or that they should want. Um, so uh, the more interesting question is, because I look at this like something. There's a lot of things that I advocate. Everyone here, you know, they know that I'm into foreskin restoration. They know that I'm in communal showers. They know, and those are probably the best two examples, because as much as I like those things and as much as I think those are valuable, I also know that most people don't want those things. All right, there's, you know, whatever, 100 million circumcised men in America, and only, you know, 1% of them or less are actively even, or in any extent, even toying with the idea of foreskin restoration. It's probably less than that, actually. And I think that those people would be well served, but they don't know. And it's also not something that's objectively, I'm going to say they must do it or it's the only possible way or that they should. The same thing with communal showers. I think communal showers are very valuable, and I think most people would benefit from them. But I can concede that there are probably cases where this isn't true. Something that's less contentious would be like gym. I think going to the gym and working out is very good for people in general. Like it's healthy. It's good for your mind. It's good for your emotions. It's good for your self-image. It's good for socializing and all those things. But would that mean that I would then say everybody needs to have a gym membership and everybody needs to go 3 to 5 times a week or whatever? And I would say no. I can, off the top of my head, think of many examples of people who legitimately wouldn't want to do that. There's people who are already in shape and don't need to go anymore. You know, I've met people like that who are in far better shape than me. You know, maybe they were athletic in the past and they're happy with their body now and they don't feel any need to go to the gym at this point. I know people who are just too busy, right? They're like, hey, I'm in school, I've got 2 jobs, I've got a wife, I've got kids, I'm growing a business, whatever else. I'm poor, you know, I'm just getting out of college and I have a lot of debt and I have to put all of my income towards that, and I don't really have the time or the disposable income to join a gym, right? So those are plausible, and there's a whole bunch of other reasons that I know. There's people who say, you know, it sounds nice, but I honestly would be happier just enjoying the food that I eat and living a relaxed lifestyle, and the whole rigmarole of going through the effort. Like I even if they acknowledge the benefits, they say it's just not worth it to me. I value being relaxed more, and those are all valid. And I'm not in a position to coerce those people into saying, hey, um, you should value gym going more, you should work out more. And it's a market failure if you don't do that. It's not a market failure. The market's giving you what you want. So the harder question is to look at people and say, what do you really want? That was the whole point of the video I made 6 or 7 years ago. It had to be at least 7 years ago at this point because I didn't live in New Hampshire yet. But the problem with capitalism is that it does give you what you want. And so if you want food and you want luxury, you can have it. And you can have a life where you don't have to work a lot. You know, you can have a part-time job and you're going to have a calorie surplus every day and you're going to have luxuries, things that would have been luxuries in any other time period at your fingertips all the time. And that's not a problem. That in itself is the kind of the idea in terms of materialism. That's the best that we can really ever hope for with a society. But it does make you have to ask very sincere questions to yourself. What do you really want? And there's more than one answer to that. The answer to that is not I want to be a carbon copy of you know this person or that person. I don't want to. The correct answer isn't necessarily that you have to have a certain body or a certain type of life, but you have to ask yourself. And far be it for me or someone else to tell you that's the wrong answer, that you should adopt this or that alternative. So let's get to these comments. The supply of commuter showers is way too high. It's a market failure. You are just completely wrong about that. Capitalism is socialism for rich people. Well, maybe today that is. You know, a large state is good for crony capitalism, and it's good for big corporations to take advantage of. Good evening. What are your thoughts on Dr. Shiva Adurai? Not to get off topic, but he's really bashing the club. I don't know who that is, and I don't know what bashing the club is, so I have no thoughts on this guy. I don't know who that is. How does libertarianism deal with negative externalities with very diffuse costs, namely climate change as a result of CO2 emissions? So pollution is fairly easy. Pollution, all right, if you have a factory that is setting out pollution that is polluting the ground or the air quality or the water quality, that's a tort. Anyone who is suffering from that pollution can sue you. And this actually, we have historically, this initially was the case. When the first factories were, maybe not necessarily the very first factories, but in the mid 19th century, excuse me, in England, when some of the early factories were starting up, you know, they produced a lot of soot and a lot of ash, and this would then rain down on surrounding, you know, fields and homes, and it would destroy orchards. You know, apple orchards would wither and houses would get destroyed, and the farmers and the tenants and whoever else was getting harmed would go and sue the factory and say, hey, you just dumped poison all over my orchard or all over my home or into my watershed or whatever it was, and so you owe me damages, you know, for everything basically that you damaged. And this gave them an incentive to, well, they had to pay, right? So paying out would potentially bankrupt them, but at the very least, they gave them a strong incentive to stop doing this. And this process was interrupted by the government, oddly enough, because what the factories realize is we have way more employees, we have more money. So that means that we have more political influence. So the factory owners could go to Parliament, in the case of the UK, and say, hey, pass a law that gives us immunity from this so that we can't be sued. And so it's kind of interesting that you bring that up, because that's what most people think is um, you need the government to protect you, when it was actually the government that interceded. And we still have that today. So if you look at something like the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, that oil rig operation, if something were to go wrong, the potential damages would run into the many billions or trillions of dollars, which means either BP would never do it, or they would only do it with such incredible safety standards to make a problem happening one in whatever, so tiny that it would never happen. However, they didn't do that because they had limited liability because of the government. The government had rules that said if there was a spill, BP was only liable for, I think it was $70 or $80 million. Now, $70 or $80 million isn't tiny, but it is tiny to what potentially could have happened and what actually ended up happening. So that's how it comes to what I would call pollution. Now, calling CO2 a pollution is difficult because CO2 normally occurs. There's a ton of CO2 that's going into the atmosphere every year from forest fires, from animals breathing, from volcanoes, from the sea, from all these things. And the other thing is calling climate change an externality is also difficult because climate change is something that happens anyway. Now, I'm not denying that humans have an effect. I'm sure humans do have an effect. It's debatable how much, which is, again, not to dismiss that I'm not saying we don't. I'm sure that we do. I'm not sure how much it is. We do not understand the climate well enough to be able to say this is exactly what would happen if we were not here, or if our activity was frozen at the level of 1800 or 1950 or whatever it was. The other thing is the climate is going to change. We don't know how much of that is due to humans. We don't know how much of that is due to an individual factory, an individual car, or an individual activity. And we don't even know that it's going to be net negative. I mean, you can point to say it continues. We don't know how much it's going to warm, and we don't know what the effect the warming is going to have. And we can do scenarios, and it's very easy. Climate alarmists will do this thing where they'll say, look at all the bad things that will happen. And I'm not minimizing the fact that if there is a change in the climate, which there will be one way or another, that there are going to be negative consequences. It used to be that the Sahara was full of lakes and was a savanna. And when the climate changed and it became the Sahara Desert, that was cataclysmic for anybody who lived there. Okay, so if the sea levels rise, that's going to be cataclysmic for a lot of people. But it's not all bad, because there's also going to be people who benefit. If half of Siberia becomes arable, that could be a very good thing. And so again, this is not to minimize the fact that there might be winners and losers, but I think that the alarmists out there are making it sound like, let's just tally up all the bad things and ignore the fact that there could be good things. And to be honest, that calculation is so difficult to make. I would actually question anyone's ability to make it. So I'm not here claiming that the net effect will be good. I'm not saying that because I don't know, and I don't trust anyone who says that they do know. I mean, I've had people debate me this, and they'll say stuff like, I could do the analysis in 10 minutes on my computer. I'm like, if that's what you believe, then you are totally ignorant to the scale of that calculation. So for pollution, I think it's very easy. And if you're talking about CO2, calling CO2 a pollution is a little wonky, because then are we going to start, arresting volcanoes and arresting things like that? So yeah. And also the government has retarded our ability to do this by giving exemptions and by taking stuff away from torts and making them criminal law. So instead of everybody who gets pollution from a factory being able to sue the hell out of that factory, which they would have every incentive to do, because A, they were harmed, and B, they can make a buck out of it. So it's kind of, there's a built-in incentive to make it happen. But if the government comes in and says, short-circuits that process, then you end up where we ended up. What's up? We've had many economics crises over the years. Well, we have, that's true. It's amazing that we have, because we've had a Federal Reserve that's point is to stop that. So it's amazing that, like, no matter how much they exist, they can't stop us. I believe you should stay away from political topics and stick with other topics you are popular with, something you should think about. Well, be more specific, please. But no, this channel started as a political channel. That is something that I care about and find interesting. I'm going to continue to talk about that. I'm happy to talk about other topics. I'd also question if you're talking about circumcision or communal showers, I would consider those to be political issues as well. Not hot button ones that people are debating a lot, but ultimately those debates are going to have to become debates we have in the public space, and they're going to become political. And in fact, I hope that they do become political. We do need to use mass media to generate more demand for foreskin restoration, including more advances, stem cells. So Greg, I mean, I agree. And my point here is I don't want to use coercion to change people's minds. I want to persuade people to change their minds. I want to get on here and tell people, look, you can have a better sex life. You can have more fun. There's a whole level of sexuality that you're missing out on and that you can regain, if not completely, in large measure. And so what you should, I would recommend that you do that you think about doing that. And obviously, I mean, making videos is one thing, but I would be more than happy if I had the means to go further than that. I mean, I thought if I had the money, I would go to Hollywood and I'd be like, I will give your movie money if you put in positive references about foreskin. I'll give your movie money if you have a character who's uncircumcised and it's depicted in a responsible way that's, whatever. I would be 100% on board with that, and if you don't have the money to just do the lobbying to get it done, just to put it in the public space more that people are talking about and persuading people about it. 100% agree. Now, I don't agree with coercion. I'm not going to use taxes. The government's role in this should be to end all subsidy of circumcision. Obviously, that's a no-brainer. And on top of that, to ban it if possible. I realize there's lots of problems with that, but ultimately, I can't refute my own logic there. It's a rights violation. It should be banned. Um, I don't like the I don't know what's best for you argument that much. While generally true, I can think of counterexamples like using meth, almost always wrong decision. The issue is coercion. Well, and the problem here too, Parisia, and I agree, like, well, what about somebody who's doing really stupid? The other problem is the instruments, the power that you would use to correct their wrong think imposes costs of itself, right? So if you're going to have a regulatory state that can try and stop people from doing drugs, you end up with a drug war, which is probably worse than the drugs in the first place. And it's actually hard to find a way that could be sliced in such a perfect way that we'll have a government policy to stop drug use, stop drug abuse, which to be all in all honesty would have to include things like alcohol, right? I mean, way too many people drink alcohol is at least as net damaging as these other drugs. I realize that doing a little meth is worse than doing a little bit of alcohol, but way more people do alcohol and it's way more normalized. So I think the net effects on alcohol are actually much worse if you look at the aggregate society. And I don't know, I don't think, I mean, this is the reason I am a libertarian and indeed an anarchist, is because of the incentive structures in government, because they're divorced from the market, because they have incentives to grow as a bureaucracy, to extend their power, because they don't have to listen, because they have sovereign immunity, because of all these problems, and they're separated from the knowledge, the dispersed knowledge of society, because they're not a profit and loss organization, that they're incredibly dangerous. They're not very good at their job. So I don't even think it's hypothetically possible to have a bureaucracy or government institution that can address a real social problem, which is not, again, you don't want to deny it's a real social problem, but that can address it in a way that isn't worse than the problem itself. At least I don't know of any counterexamples. Maybe they exist, but that's my problem. So yes, meth is bad. Don't do meth. Hey, I don't drink. I don't think people should drink. But we know that prohibition doesn't work, and we know that the war on drugs doesn't work, in the sense that it doesn't stop it from going on, but then it saddles us with all these unintentional costs, assuming that, let's not be cynical. I mean, we could be cynical and say they like the war on drugs because of the power it gives them, but let's, without even going there, it's been a disaster from that point of view. Is there a question about guns, society, and crime that you think would be interesting to try and answer in an honest, scientific way that hasn't been answered yet satisfactorily? I'm looking for data project to do. I don't think that one thing that's not very clear is what effect, if any, guns have as a deterrent on crime. This has been studied a lot, but unsatisfactory. And the most of the research we do have has been on concealed carry because there's been a lot of examples of that being liberalized at the state level. So that's been studied exhaustively, but still without a definite conclusion. But even more difficult to study would just be gun ownership generally. Does that surveys of criminals, and this makes sense, reveal that is something they worry about. They don't want to get shot. They'd rather have to deal with the police than just getting shot in the face or whatever. But we don't have a lot of stats to say how much that really affects it. And the biggest question, what we don't have any stats on, is what degree of, if any, does gun ownership restrain the acts of government? Now, I know a lot of people will say, and not without reason, to say, look, you have a Second Amendment in America, and the government still does a lot of terrible things. You still have, the Branch Davidians, you still have Ruby Ridge, you still have no-knock raids and all this stuff. And so, what good is the gun rights? And that's a fair question, but it's assuming that if we didn't have guns, that it could potentially be worse, right? If we didn't have guns, the police state might even be worse than it is. I say might because I don't know for sure. If there was a way to study that, that would be incredible. But I don't know how you would measure government tyranny. And we have examples of the states backing down. The best example, the highest profile example that I know about is what happened with the Bundys, where you had a heavily armed civilians facing off against heavily armed federal agents, and the federal agents backed down. Now, that's not necessarily an indicator that they were worried that if they got in a shootout, the federal government would have been overrun by a revolution, but just the cost of engaging, the number of people who would have died, the media storm, they backed down, at least in that instance, at least for the time being. It's not a perfect example, but it's one that I would bring up. And so, yeah, the federal government still does horrible things, despite the fact there's 300 million guns in private hands in the United States. So the question would be, is there any evidence that it's restrained their actions at all? And I think that it's likely that it has, but I have no way of gauging that, and so it makes it a hard point to make. So if you could do any research on that, I would find that pretty incredible. But I'm not holding my breath that there's much chance of that. I use communal showers in Roswell, New Mexico. Uh, what what were you like, at a gym or at a army base? I met an incredibly wealthy fat man who owned a string of Crunchies chickens franchises. There were all sorts of strange characters there. What kind of place was this that you met him at? And was he cut or uncut? Most guys in my college go into the sauna steam room completely naked. Is that quite common there? So where I live, it's pretty common. There's no rule, so there are people who use towels, but I'd say it's at least 50% go completely naked. In Scandinavia, I'm told it is pretty much you got to go naked. They frown on people wearing things. Um, when you mentioned showering with a rich chicken restaurant owner in New Mexico, it immediately reminded me of Gus Fringe from Breaking Bad. Uh, if we didn't have guns, we would have total speech controls like Europe. The USA should blockade supposed Western ally countries that don't allow free speech. Yeah, so that's what I'm alluding to. We don't know that for sure, Gregory, but you might be right. Like they seem that there's lots of things the federal government will do, and then there's things that they seem to have been more reluctant to do. Are you excited about Justin Amash running for president? So I am a Justin Amash fan. If you go back, you will find that I actually did videos on Justin Amash way back in like 2011. Though I believe they are like the least watched videos that I have. I've met him a couple times, and I think he's a very principled, honest guy. That's my take. I mean, I don't know him personally, but like that's my view. And I do think he's a very strong libertarian. Uh, I think on the picture when he's done interviews on the wall, he's got pictures of Rothbard, Rand, Mises, Friedman, Hayek, and Bastiat. So he is he's definitely very close ideologically. Am I excited? No, because I just don't see the Libertarian Party is just hard to get excited about. They just have a very hard time making any kind of impact at all. And we'll see if he's somebody like a Harry Brown or somebody like that, or even Michael Badnarik. Bednark isn't that famous now, but like he had an influence on me, so um, that's fine. But I don't see that he's going to have that role. It just comes across as, and look, he's been punished for being principled by his party. So he had to leave his party. He left his party on principle. The GOP was trying to ruin him. They've been trying to ruin him from the get-go. They never supported him. They didn't even support him when he was a state representative. And they've gerrymandered against him. And so, but it's good. And so that's all true. But it's going to come across of you can't hack it in the GOP. So you're going from the major leagues to the little leagues. That's how it looks to, I think, a lot of people. Uh, and Luke, I'm still waiting for your answer. Like, where was this communal shower in Roswell? Were you at like a YMCA or what? Do they even have enough water there to run that? What's your favorite gun? Probably. I'm just gonna borrow straight from Boston Tea Party. I'm just gonna say a M1A fully loaded from Springfield Armory. Um, GB Arena from Calgary. Um, a part of me wishes my state would ban energy drinks, but then I would just be hopelessly addicted to hardcore black market energy drinks. Maybe they would be made of meth and Sprite soda mix. You get some jungle juice like Trayvon Martin. Yeah, if you're hoping that the government's going to regulate your bad habits, I mean, good luck. Uh, that's just not going to happen. This is the hard part. This is the one of the great allures of government is people can think, I don't need to solve my problems. I'll just vote and they'll take care of it. And that really leads to a lot of moral hazard and a lot of disappointment because they're just not very good at that kind of thing. So I'm sorry, Luke, you're going to have to find something else to help you get over that. Or is there a sauna culture in Canada? Gregory, you should go into the Communal Shower subreddit because there's a couple commenters there who are from Canada and they seem convinced that communal showers are more common in Canada and they're more comfortable with nudity. Would communal showering with women make you feel uncomfortable? Would it ruin the experience for you? Uh, I don't think it would as long as there were hot guys there as well. I've been to nude beaches with women. And so seeing naked women is fine. And obviously, with me, there's no sexual tension there. So I almost feel like it would be easier for me than it would be for a hetero man. Um, as long as there are hot guys there, I really wouldn't care. It would be fine. Um, yeah. So no, I I'm not saying. Look, I do think that I'm not one of these people. I do believe that there are many situations where uh, segregation on sex makes sense and is a good idea. And so I'm not one of those people that says it should always be mixed. But I do think though that there are contexts where it's fine. And like I said, nude beaches, it seems to be fine. And I know that like in parts of Europe, they do have co-ed like saunas and co-ed showers and co-ed naked pools. And so it seems like it's a very possible thing that does work. And so um, yeah, it would be fine. Like I would prefer that everybody was a hot guy, but if there's some women in there, I mean, there's there's always men that I'm not attracted to as well, and like I think I would look on a woman the same way I would look at a man who I'm not attracted to, and so it's fine. It doesn't hurt me. This is one thing that keeps a lot of gay guys out of communal showers. Actually, is they say, well, there's just going to be old men and they're ugly. Fair enough, but it doesn't hurt you to see an old ugly man, and just like it wouldn't hurt you to see a woman. So I don't think that it doesn't bother me. I think that would be fine in certain contexts. I wouldn't say there's a sauna culture, but most guys go in naked in the steam room. I feel like you should go naked into a steam room. That's how I do it. That most people do it that way where I am. Yes, I agree. Communal showers and nudity is more relaxed. It's much more relaxed to go nude. One of my subscribers, uh, he joined the communal shower forum and he posted a story. And if you go in there, you'll find a heading, article titled "My Experience on a High School Football Team." And it was really interesting because he was saying that um, normally whenever they, if they practiced after school or during the weekend or whatever, they would never shower together as a team ever. The practice would end, every kid would go home. But occasionally they would have a workout in the morning. So they'd work out at like 6:30 or 7 a.m. And then when they would finish, they would go straight to school, and there would not be time to go home. And so they had communal showers at their school. So they would go and they would shower in the communal showers, but they would wear compression shorts. So nobody would go naked. And he said that they would all be in there and they would all be completely silent. They would never talk. They would stare at the wall, and there would be a line of people waiting, uh, and they would never talk. And then when they were done, they would wash in their compression shorts. When they were done, they would go dry off in their compression shorts, and then they would go, and there would be lines of guys waiting to go into the bathroom stalls, where they would then change into their underwear in the bathroom stalls. So they would not even do the towel dance. They would wait for a stall to open and change in the stall. And if you think about it, it kind of reminds me of people who ride subways and they don't talk to each other. And it's like, what are we? To me, it's a baffling situation. Like somebody who doesn't ride public transport on the regular. When I go to New York, when I go to London, and I ride, or sometimes when I go to Boston, uh, when I ride public transit and people are ignoring each other, it strikes me as very weird and surreal. Now I get it in that situation. People are doing their own thing and they're all strangers. But when you're on a football team, like you're like a team. Like you should know each other really well, and you should be social. You should be bonding. You should be close. You should trust each other. And I mentioned to him, I said, it sounds like your team like just do not trust each other at all, which can't be good. And he said, it's funny you say that because the coaches would say that we don't trust each other either. Now, that's not necessarily because they don't take naked showers together, but I think that would actually help. And there was actually a guy who just joined a couple days ago who said he's a swimming team coach, and he said that's 100% true, that they bond together, they get better, they get along better when they shower together. Even though in swimming, it's kind of a team sport, but it's individual, one at a time. So it's not like a football team or a lacrosse team, hockey team, basketball, anything like that. He thought it would be even more valuable in that context. So I find that very strange when you have a setting where it should be relaxed and social, and they're getting to know each other, and they're comfortable around each other, and they're comfortable with themselves and with their bodies, but instead they're not confident, they're worried, they're paranoid, they don't trust each other, they're not getting very clean. On top of all that, it's taking much longer than it should. The throughput is way less when you're doing the lines and waiting to change and all that. So they're imposing a lot of costs on themselves to avoid being seen naked. In their estimation, it's quite obvious that being seen naked is something that's really dangerous they want to avoid, but it's really not that bad. Um, as a straight man, I would feel uncomfortable showering with women, mainly because I don't think they'd find my body attractive. Well, Cinefan, go to a nude beach and you will see plenty of bodies that are not attractive. And that's one of the things that the whole communal nudity thing is actually very good for, is your body image, because you see that not everyone is a model, not everybody's on Instagram, not everybody has Photoshop. There's the good, the bad, and the ugly, and there's everything in between, and it really gives you a much more balanced perspective on yourself. And being insecure about how you look, and I'm not saying that there's never not a reason for it. Maybe you do have a tiny penis, maybe you are overweight, maybe you do have a funny looking mole, or whatever it is. I've got a good friend in Wyoming who, on top of being uncircumcised, has vitiligo on his dick. So he's got patches of like light colored pigment on his, or lack of pigment rather, on his skin. And I can see why somebody would be like a little nervous about that. But I'll tell you what, when he gets naked with other people and nothing happens, it actually helps. And if you were with, if you, you'll see that not every girl is a hot babe, and not every guy is a fit jock. And dicks vary, bodies vary, and like I said, I've been to nude beaches with women, and it's actually kind of interesting because it's almost like the correlation is with less attractive older people, basically. So um, yeah, I understand that, but it's something that I think people get over pretty quick. Um, don't say that. Yeah, I'm with Luke. Don't say that. Did you ever confront your parents about circumcision? Did they accept they made a mistake? No, I never have. And I always kind of felt like, I'm sure there was no malice in their opinion, and they just did what they did because where I was born and when I was born, it was done to like everybody. Now I'm slowly getting to the point where I do want to bring it up just because it's something that I'm now consciously avoiding. Like it's becoming difficult to have a conversation without, oh, restoration this or restoration that. So I think just for the simplicity of like, not having this thing that you have to avoid talking about, it's going to make sense. Part of me is like, well, it doesn't really matter because they're not going to have kids anymore, but that might actually matter because they have relatives, we have relatives, and if it gets out that this is something that bothers me, it's possible that like some of my relatives may end up not cutting their kids, which would be great. Um, so I am getting to that point where I may do that. Uh, Not trying to be rude, just curious. I don't see what you asked, so I'm not sure. Children are simply not acclimatized to nudity, so by the time they're 5 or 6, they already assign an enormous taboo to naked bodies, especially their own. Yeah, this is something that gets debated in the group. Uh, it seems like it's much harder to get somebody who's 12 or 13 and get them used to doing it than somebody who just has always been used to doing it. So, like if you go to Iceland, nobody cares and they're all completely comfortable because they do it regularly from the time they're born. I do think it's totally possible, though, to kind of hack that when people get used to it when they're 12 or 13. If they do it a lot, I think that they're going to be fine. So, uh, yeah. I mean, I'll get in trouble for this, but I think it's fine to have if you raise your kids to be comfortable with nudity, it's a good thing, and the more the better, to be honest. But uh, you know, you only fight one battle at a time. Um, is the vitiligo guy black? No, he was white, but he had darker skin. Big guy, Division I college athlete, really nice guy. Just a total beast. He could squat like over 500 pounds for reps, and he was uncircumcised and he had vitiligo spots on his dick, which I've seen other places too, but it's pretty rare. Um, what do you think of the stereotype that black and Latino men have larger penises than white men? I think that's probably not. I think both groups are too large and they vary too much within the group that I don't know like on the average maybe, but in a country like the United States, that you're getting such selection populations that I don't know. And the way that they do those studies, those measurement studies, are highly suspect anyway. Like so many of them are based on self-reporting or things like the nurse tugging slightly, which is not going to give you necessarily what an erect penis would look like. So, in my personal experience, I don't see it. When I see naked black dudes at my gym, which I see fairly regularly, it's they fit in normally, and same with Latinos. So that's anecdotal. That doesn't prove anything, but I think the all penis size studies are highly suspect. Uh, I've just embraced it, don't care anymore, and I still get laid. Embraced what exactly, Arthur? Tank tops or t-shirts? I prefer t-shirts, to be honest. Every time I wear a tank top, I get a sunburn that hurts. Was it easy to come out to your family is gay? So some of my family know I'm gay and some of them don't, and I never officially came out. I never had like I'm coming out party. Um, Communal showering in New Mexico. I was at a gym racquetball club. I used to play racquetball with extremely old senior citizens there. Governor Bill Richardson gave us a plaque for oldness. Okay. I embrace being hairy as a werewolf, having an extremely hairy body. Oh, okay, there you go. Did you lose your jobs because of the oil prices dropping so low? Do you think you will wait for another oil job or will you look for a different kind of job? So I'm not an employee. So I haven't been an employee in over 10 years. So the idea of losing a job, I never like had a job. I've always been a subcontractor. Um, I have not heard anything. This is normally a period when I don't work. So it's kind of normal for me to have not heard anything at this point. I don't know. There's a good chance that there's nothing going on. I've gone 18 months before without working. We'll see if that happens this time or not. I would be open to doing something different, but I have no idea what that would be at this point since I've done oil for so long. Always Coke, never Pepsi. Arthur, I'm pretty hairy too. Well, there you go, Cinefan. He's telling you you can just get over it. It really does. Like I've told this story before, but I remember when I first joined the gym, and I had some communal showering experience before that, but it had been 15 years before, more or less. And there was a guy who worked out there, and he was very fit. He was younger than I. He looked like he was probably 20, 21, and he was in the I think he was in the Air Force. And he'd come out and he worked out every day. And he had abs. He had probably I don't know, 11, 12% body fat. So nice definition, nice pecs, nice chest, nice back, nice butt, nice legs, handsome face. And it was very easy to look at him and feel inferior and feel like I'm not as in good shape. When I first joined, I was way overweight. I was probably more like 35, 36% body fat when I first started going to the gym back at the start of 2015. And it would have been easy to feel inferior in some sense, and I did, to be honest. And then I was showering with him and other people, and then I started to notice stuff like, well, I have blue eyes and he has brown eyes, so maybe he likes his eyes, but if he likes blue eyes, he's probably going to look at me and be like, wow, he has blue eyes and I'll never have them. I'm taller than him, right? So no matter how much he works out and no matter how fit he gets, he'll never be 6'2". I'm 6'2". He was maybe 5'9", 5'10", something like that. So maybe that bothers him. And then I was like, even if I got to the same fitness level, say I got to the same body fat percentage and the same relative mass of lean mass on my body, we would look different. We would not be the same. We were just built differently. And so there was nothing objectively superior about him or me in relative terms. And there were things that I had that he'll never have. I could go into more detail, but I don't want to give too much red meat to you all. So there's a perspective there to be had. He could look at you and he could say, I wish I was that hairy. I have a friend in Iceland who's a beast, man. He's a bodybuilder. He can deadlift over 700 pounds, but he can't grow a beard. He was never growing a beard. He can't grow a beard, and it feels emasculating for him. So um, we've all got relative advantages. We all have our own unique strengths and weaknesses. And one of the things about the communal showering is that it kind of gives you a much better perspective on where you fall on all of that. You're still a young guy. You're going to see old dudes and be like, okay, all right, I'm not 75. I'm doing good. So, and then what ends up happening is then you start seeing that guy not as somebody who you will be inferior to, but somebody that can inspire you to do a little bit better, and that he might end up looking up to you anyway. Apparently girls don't care, according to my current girl. Have you read all the books on the back? Hard to retain that much information. I haven't read them all. I've read a lot, but not all of them. I'm still working on it. Are bottoms less likely to restore? That is a good question. Well, Parisia, I've only met... How many bottoms have I met? Sorry, not bottoms. How many restorers have I met? I've only met maybe 3 or 4 restorers, like random. Oh, more than that, because I went to a restorer meeting once. But all the ones that I met were bottoms. But the sample size is so small that I don't know. And I've wondered this too. I've wondered if there's an association between guys who are cut and uncut and being tops, because if being uncut is more pleasurable in terms of penetrative sex, then you would think maybe they would be more likely to become tops. And maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but there are plenty of uncut guys who are complete bottoms. And when you look at the UK, it's kind of the same. Well, I think most people say it's about a 2-to-1. There's about 2 bottoms for every top. And I don't know that I've not noticed any correlation with being cut or uncut. And as far as restoration go, I think it's across the board. Like I said, all the ones that I met are bottoms, but that is clearly a selection bias because I'm a top, so I'm going to meet more bottoms. And so if there were tops who are restoring, I'm less likely to even meet them. So I don't know. It hasn't been studied. What exactly do you do in oil and gas? I create digital stratigraphic maps of the underlying formation on oil rigs for purposes of analysis, exploration, and for aiding in the drilling process. Yeah, the film Starship Troopers had co-ed showers. I actually think that system would probably work in a lot of situations. There's plenty of water in Roswell, by the way. Uh, it is built over a water table, whatever that is. Yeah, there's a water table everywhere. Um, do you have any advice for men who are interested in communal showering but is afraid to do so because of being circumcised? Yeah, so I'm obviously very sympathetic to um, having insecurity issues because you are circumcised. I do as well. But if you're living in the United States or Canada or Israel, most guys are circumcised. So nobody is going to notice that you're uncircumcised at all. In fact, they are much more likely to notice if you are uncircumcised. So um, I would just realize that the other guys there are not paying attention to you in that way. They're not going to notice that aspect. And people look. This is one thing. I hate when people say nobody looks. Everyone looks, but like they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to tease you or anything like that. That's very rare even in high school, which is the time when that's the most likely to happen. So I would say one thing that I advise for anyone who wants to communal shower, whether you're circumcised or not, is if you can go with a friend. If you have a workout buddy, a coworker, just somebody that you know, that you trust, that you're comfortable with, if you go with them as a pair or as three or four people, you will be much more comfortable than if you go alone. You will feel less like people are watching you because you're in a group, and it's just a little bit of a confidence builder. So that would be like practically speaking, if you could find someone to go with you, that would really help. Um, have you ever seen someone with an 8-pack in the showers? I've definitely seen 6-packs. I mean, I have a subscriber around here who's from Iceland who has a 6-pack who I got to communal shower with when I was in Iceland. He had a very nice 6-pack and a very nice uncut dick. And if he's watching, he should say who he is because he knows who he is. Um, maybe his wife is watching too. Um, I don't know that I ever saw an 8-pack though, to be honest. Evening, comrade. My hairiness isn't that I have a problem. My problem is that I kind of have a belly. Cinefan, been there, done that. We've all been there. I would just say that going is not going. It's going to give you a much. Lots of people have bellies. Let's just put it that way. In fact, here's a little anecdote. So in one of the gay libertarian Facebook groups I'm a member of, there's a guy there who's very hot, and he'd always post pictures, not nude pictures, but like like at Halloween parties and stuff. And he was in the military, and he had great abs and nice muscle tone. He was just super sexy twink. He was a little bit older. He was in his late 20s, but in really good shape. And very randomly, I mean, I wasn't really close friends with this guy, but I went to visit another friend of mine in New York. And he was like, "Hey, guess what? So and so is in town too. Do you want to hang out with him?" And I was like, "Oh man, he's hot as hell. Yeah, let's definitely hang out." So the three of us all meet. We have lunch together, and then we spent a couple hours trying to figure out what we wanted to do. We were in this kind of catch-22 where we wanted to do something authentic and not touristy, and everything that wasn't touristy sounded kind of shitty. So we ended up going to a Korean bathhouse where they have enforced nudity and a spa, hot tub, steam room, all that stuff. And when we went, this guy who in all of his pictures was, had abs and nice muscle tone, we get naked and look, he looked good. He was a really good looking guy, but like he had a gut, and like those pictures, they might have been a year or two old. They might have been Photoshopped. I don't know, but he still looked good. He still was very handsome, but he had a gut, and there was no hiding that. And so a lot of people's perception of what everyone looks like, it's based on Instagram, it's based on Facebook, it's based on magazines and TV and in a sense, it's not false because there are people who do look like that, but they're actually very rare. And even the people who do look like that typically don't look like that all the time. You're seeing them at their best, on their leanest, at the end of their cut, when the light's just right, after they've done Photoshop, blah, 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 blah. And so, if you have a gut, it's fine. Lots of other people there will have a gut. You'll see that. You'll see people who are older. You'll see people who have smaller dicks. You'll see people who have I mean, you see people who are missing arms or have deformities or have FOPA. Have you ever heard of FOPA? Fat over penis area. You have guys who you can't see their dicks at all because they've got so much gut that it covers it. So um, they can do it, they can handle it, you can handle it, and it's just something that gives you perspective. So I understand why people get nervous about it. I really do. But I think it's something that if you do even one time, a lot of that fear will go away. And after you've been doing it, say you go to the gym 5 days a week and you just shower in the communal showers every day, within a week, you're going to be completely over it. Uh, I was pleased to find out that my new girlfriend, who is a Serbian immigrant, is against circumcision. I was afraid she'd be freaked out about my restoring. Actually, it's funny you should say that because when I went to New York to have with my friends, the one friend was a Serbian. He's a law student here, but he's from Serbia and he's uncircumcised. Um, I also love when people say girls don't like, girls like cut dick or whatever. Most girls live in uncut societies, and they might see cut dicks as like a cool fetish because that's the exotic thing. But no, it's false. Uh, Foreskins are there because girls like foreskins and they mated with men who had foreskins. If women did not like foreskins, we wouldn't have them. And not that it's my thing, but you can go onto websites dedicated to how much better it is for women when they have sex with a guy who's uncut. So yeah, I'm glad. Well, I'm glad that she supports that with you. I've had one or two guys. I had one guy who's like, that's unnatural, which is kind of a weird way to look at it. But yeah. So yeah, congratulations. That's good. I'm glad she's supportive. Um, what do you do when a girl flirts with you? Do you tell her you are gay or do you enjoy the attention? So the problem here is that that's very rare. I'm at the gym, girls are not flirting with me. I'm meeting gay dudes, girls are not flirting with me. I'm hiking, I'm at work. I don't drink, so I'm not going to bars. So um, that's actually so rare that I can't actually think of a time that it happened, to be honest. The other problem is I would be oblivious. The last time that I know that it happened was when I was in college, and there was an issue where my best friend's wife was hitting on me, and I had no idea. Like I found out about it later. It completely, it just went over my head. I wouldn't know. I'm not like paying attention to girls in that way. It would be like, I don't know, if someone said, "Did you know that dog was hitting on you?" And it'd be like, "What?" It was just what? I was just, so like the last time, this is fun. I mean, I had a girlfriend in ninth grade, but it was very non-sexual. And I remember like going to a camp with my family, like a campground with my family that had dances at night. I remember a girl came up and asked me to dance, but I was like 8 or 9. So no, it's so rare, and I would probably not even notice. Uh, have you ever seen Penn and Teller's episode on circumcision? I have, and it's excellent. They do a great job. Uh, In fact, that was one of before American Circumcision came out, that was pretty much one of the only really effective pieces of media out there. That's a great episode, and Penn and Teller are great. I mean, they're entertaining and they're good libertarians too. Yeah, Penn's a boss. Do you get into oil mostly to pay the bills, or do you care about the paleontology, igneous petroleum? Well, don't say igneous because there's no oil in igneous rocks unless you're crazy. I do it for the money. It can be interesting. Like the geology is interesting. I am actually interested in paleontology, but to be perfectly frank, we don't do a ton of paleontology. When a drilling rig drills through a sedimentary rock, even if there's lots of fossils, the drill bit's going to tear them to pieces. And so when they get to the surface, they're going to be microscopic. I'm basically looking at sand through a microscope, and well, some of the cuttings are bigger than sand, but it's unusual for me to see fossils I have. But normally you're seeing tiny little fragments, like a little sliver of a worm or something like that. So I find that interesting, but that's not why I do it. I do it for the money. How did you get into oil? Luke, that's a good question that I will stop talking on Grinder to answer. So I had a relative, I had an uncle who had worked for Halliburton for a long time, for 20 or 30 years, and we were close. I'd spent the summer with him at one point, him and his wife and my cousins. And when the last couple years I was in college, he had said, "Hey, I'm pretty sure I can get you a job." He had actually retired, and while he was retired, they were calling him just saying, "Hey, we really need workers. We really need workers." And he was like, "I'm retired. I'm not going to work anymore." And they kept badgering him about it. And so, he said, "Well, he got his friends, like he knew people who were in the field. He got them jobs, and they kept asking for more. And so he was like, "Hey, they really want workers. You know, I could probably get you a job." So I graduated from Michigan State in 2008 in the spring, and we had a big family vacation on Lake Cumberland in Kentucky. And during that summer, he said, "Hey, if you the offer still stands. If you would like, you come down to Texas, and I can get you a job in the oil industry." So I was like, you know what? I didn't have any other job prospects, so I was like, let's do it. So I moved down to Texas right in like August of 2008. And so it was right during like the Beijing Olympics when Michael Phelps was winning like 35 gold medals or whatever it was. And turned out that my uncle could not get me a job. He thought that he could. We did the whole nepotism thing where he would take me to like his old boss and be like, "Hey, how's it going? Here's my nephew. He needs a job." And they're like, "We're not hiring anybody." So we did that for like a month, driving all over Texas. And he'd say, "Well, I got a friend here, and I got a friend here, and I got a friend here." And everyone was like, "Nah, we're not hiring anybody." The oil industry was beginning to crash right at that point. And he's like, "I'm real sorry. I thought I could get you a job, and apparently I can't. So I don't know anyone. I don't have any connections." He's like, "But there's other people out there who I don't have connections with. Maybe we could get a job that way." So then we began again, just driving around, going to oil rigs, right? Just driving around East Texas, and you can see an oil rig on the horizon, and we would just try and find a way to get there and knock on doors. And it took one day. We got about a dozen phone numbers. We called them all, and one of the places hired me the next day. I drove down to Houston, or actually Santa Fe, Texas, a suburb of Houston. And they said, "Well, you have no experience and you have a music degree, so we'll give you an entry level job and we'll train you on the job." And they didn't call me for a month. And then when they finally did call me, they said, "We still don't have, we need a trainer to train you, and we don't have a trainer available. So we don't have work for you at this point. But there's another guy, he's independent, he doesn't work for us, but he needs a second hand. He needs somebody to help him out. Would you be willing to do it?" And I said, "I have no idea what to do, but yeah, I'm game. I'll do it." So I went out and ended up working about 4 or 5 months with this dude on this oil rig in the Coshada Indian Reservation around Jasper, Texas, which some of you may have heard of. Jasper is kind of infamous for a crime that happened there at one point. But so I worked for him for a couple months, and then when I was done working with him, the company that hired me said, "We're actually closing because the economy had crashed," which it had in 2008, right? And they're like, "We're done." So I only worked for them for 1 week. I worked for this other guy for a couple months, and then he said, "Well, you did a good job. I'll keep working with you. We've got something up." And he said, "I've got work coming up in just a couple weeks." And so I went back to Michigan from Texas, and a couple weeks became a couple months, and it ended up being almost a year. And then he was like, "Hey, I got a job." And so I quit. I got a telemarketing job in the interim. I quit my job, drove back to Texas. I worked for him for one day, and then they finished the job. They finished the well. He's like, "Oh, we're all done." And he goes, "Thanks for coming." And I was like, "When am I going to get paid?" Because I just quit my job and drove 2,500 miles or whatever it was. And he's like, "Well, you're actually not working for me. You're working for this other guy." I'm like, "What do you mean this other guy? Who? You didn't say anything about that. Who is this other guy?" I was like, "This guy is just going to be like, I don't know who you are. I'm not paying you anything." So this other guy was this Canadian dude who was trying to start his own company, and I ended up working for that guy for 10 years until he died. So that's how I got started, and eventually I got trained in how to do everything. Um, oh no, so I'm way behind now. Sorry, guys. I need to get a job like that. Don't think there's any drilling going on in Massachusetts. No, there's no drilling going on in Massachusetts, and there never will be. Is there a pre-Cambrian oil? Absolutely, there is. Actually, that's a good question. No, no, I think the earliest oil would be like Silurian or Devonian. I'm looking at my chart here to cheat. That's a good question. Um, I did a lot of work in the Marcellus Shale, and the Marcellus Shale is mid-Devonian, which so that's in the Cambrian period though. So you're looking at 400 million years ish. Um, that's a good question. You probably could in the Silurian. I don't know. Like I don't know if there'd be anything from the Ediacaran period. So yeah, that's a good point. Like there's fungal life and there was some animal life, but there wasn't a lot. And if there probably wouldn't be any left. So I've definitely done stuff from the Cambrian, but most of the stuff that you do is from the Cretaceous or the Cenozoic. Um, I know there's Precambrian coal. Yeah, because there wouldn't be many surface plants in the Precambrian. There was surface fungus though, so that could potentially become coal. In fact, actually, most of the coal comes from like there's a reserve in Pennsylvania called Red Lake, which was a period when um, you had the cellulose heavy plants, the plant that like the heavy plant material, but we had not developed fungus had not evolved that could break it down yet. So basically, all those plants when they die, they just compacted together, and so you can still get coal today, but funguses and bacteria are likely to break it down before it becomes into coal, gets converted into coal. And so it's something like 90% of our coal comes from a relatively um, um, small area, and of course that area is called the Carboniferous. So that's split between the Pennsylvanian and the Mississippian. So that's why we get so much coal. Like the Appalachian coal is coming from that period. Uh, bu- 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 There could be abiotic sources of coal. That's a highly contentious issue. Lemon Party, there are people who argue that in good faith that might be true. I've never seen any. That's highly, I mean, there's so much. If that's true, it's almost all coming from biotic, though. That is, I guess it's possible. I've never seen any, though. And when I talk to geologists, when I talk to oil field geologists, they all think that that's wrong. And they're the people who are paid to know. Um, Georgia is giving out driver's licenses without a road test due to coronavirus. Just need parents' permission at 16. Kind of based. Yeah, kind of is. I could have used that. Yeah. Um, do you believe at some point technology will advance to the point that humans will not be able to effectively adapt to that technology? If so, what do you think the result will be? Yeah, it's really hard to, I'm not going to predict stuff that's far in the future. I don't know. Is it possible? Probably, but we create technology that's there for us to serve us and to work with us. So there's hope, but I mean, you could argue that we already are past that stage. There are plenty of people who would say, pollution or nuclear weapons or whatever else, 5G, that all these things are things that we can't cope with. So, how did based become the right wing version of woke? Does anyone know the answer history behind that? I have no idea. I'm still getting used to the term. Uh, did you know that Penn Jillette voted for Hillary in 2016? I didn't know that, but I'm not too surprised. Um, could you not get a music education job? Did you search for a while? Well, so I studied music education, and then I had, what I'll politely call irreconcilable political differences with the education staff at Michigan State. And one of the teachers there just said, "I will never let you graduate because of your political stance." And so I was like, "Well, fuck it. I don't want to fight this too much." So I switched my major to a bachelor's of arts in music, which actually lowered my credit load. And so that's the degree that I got. And so, um, I could have gotten a teaching certificate because I did actually take, there's a state administered test to get your license in Michigan, which I had already taken and passed. So I actually was certified. I could have been, I wasn't certified, but I had passed the necessary test, and I would have had the necessary degree to be certified to teach history and music, interestingly enough. But I really didn't want to have anything to do with public schools, so I was like, I'm out. So I didn't even look. Now, when I was in Texas and the company hired me and they said, well, we need someone to train you, and we don't know when that's going to be. It could be tomorrow. It could be in 2 weeks. Uh, After a couple weeks, my uncle got antsy. He's like, you should just get a regular job until they call. And so I actually did get hired as a substitute teacher in Shiro, Texas, which is Chuck Norris's hometown, small little town. And I never worked there. About I got called to go out to the oil field eventually, and the day after I went to the oil field, they called and said, "Hey, we've got, a job for you." So I got hired there, but I never worked there. They never paid me or anything. That would have been something if I had been a public school teacher. Oh, imagine what would have happened then. Uh, if Trump is reelected, do you think Pence will run in 2024? Why or why not? If Trump is reelected, which I think is likely at this point, uh, I have no idea if Pence wants to be president, but if he does, I'm sure that he'll run. And he probably does because people like that are probably ambitious for that sort of thing, but he might, I'm not sure how old he is. He looks like he's pretty healthy, but he could say he doesn't want to for whatever reason. There are people, not every politician wants to be president, right? There's plenty of senators and congressmen who never run. And it's, he might have gotten asked and he said, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know how he never ran for president. That's kind of an important thing to note. So he got asked to be vice president, and he said yes, but it wasn't like he was trying to be president, unlike everyone else who ran. So it's possible that he just doesn't want to be president. Now he's still a politician and whatever, so I wouldn't put it past him, but we don't know, and I don't know. I don't know what he's really thinking. Couldn't carbon for oil come from a carbon-rich meteorite? We don't find them in craters though, so I mean, maybe, but that's not where we find it. We find them in depositional beds. Um, everything I ever drill is something that was basically at the bottom of the ocean. It's all sedimentary rock. Uh, it's super rare. Sometimes you can get intravenous igneous rock, say a volcano forms through sedimentary rock or buries it. So sometimes you might drill through igneous rock, but that's super rare. Um, Not sure why, but K-12, I had very little issues with teachers. In college, I had lots of awful professors who were unreasonable, arrogant, and very self-aggrandizing. Uh, I got along. I mean, when I was in middle school, high school, elementary school, I got along with all my teachers. I don't know that I had any that I had acrimony or like disputes with. I might have got a bad grade or whatever, but I never got in trouble. I never had arguments. Um, I was quote unquote a good student, which didn't mean necessarily I got straight A's, but just I didn't cause trouble, and most of the time I didn't cause. There was one teacher who was just so stupid. That's just I had like two that were so stupid that I complained. I got one. I'm sure it wasn't just me, but I contributed to one getting fired. I think, and there was another one who um, I was convinced didn't know anything because she didn't, and um, because we were teaching, it was like geography one, which is like the geography of the United States, and she said something. I was like, "That's wrong." And she's like, "Well, if you're so smart, why don't you teach the class?" I'm like, "All right, I will." And I got up and I gave a lecture on the colonial period, which probably if I watched it now, I'd be like, "That's all wrong. I was a fucking idiot." But I knew more than she did. But no, in general, I got along with them fine. And in college, mostly I got along with them fine. I wasn't always arguing. The first 3 years I was in college, I never argued with anybody. Uh, the kind of cliched, preachy liberal teacher. They were all liberal pretty much, but most of them weren't being that preachy. They would just cover the, the boring material without, too much debate. And it wasn't until my junior year that I really, really got fed up with it. It was largely from watching John Mongopoulos, and you just read stuff that would just piss you off. Like, we had a student newspaper that was actually a really widely circulated, successful student newspaper. I mean, they had a budget in the millions of dollars from property that they owned and stuff, and students read it. There was a popular paper, like everybody would read it, and it was just so aggravating to read some of the articles they wrote, and I just was like, I mean, you can, I, it was actually about MLK of all things, but there, I was reading something about, MLK this, and we got to live up to MLK's dream and blah blah blah, and I was just like, I didn't like MLK that much. I actually like him better now than I did at the time, and I just wrote a letter to the editor, and I was like, he was a communist, he was a plagiarist, he was an adulterer who cheated on his wife constantly, and so I don't know why we got to pretend like he's Jesus, because he's not. And I got I got about 100 emails sent to me about that. Two or three of them were nice, and all the other ones were like, I can't believe you're in college, you should get kicked out. Um, and I took the time to reply to everybody. It ended up taking about like a month of like going through all of that. But that's when I started. I was just like, I'm done. I'm not going to sit here and listen to people say shit that I think is completely wrong and use their pulpit, their bully pulpit. So that's when I started arguing with people. Uh, Ron Swanson type, but for public schools. Well, I think they're out there. There are people who are like that. I think Pence is either 60 or 61, so he's definitely not too old. The thing is, he didn't run for president, so you know, and it's very interesting because Trump had all these people who supported him, like Chris Christie and Rudy Giuliani, and all these people who liked to. So many people hated him, and then he had a couple people who really came to bat for him, and then he just completely like cucked all of them, and he gives the VP spot to Mike Pence, who, as far as I know, like verbally did nothing for him. So that's kind of interesting. I think it was just to be like a middle American Christian right kind of, hey, I'm from New York, but I'm with your on your team or whatever. And he also seems like, he's a pretty straight politician. There's not a lot in the closet there. He seems like, I hate saying this, but like as far as politicians go, he doesn't have a lot of skeletons in the closet. So uh, maybe Ron Swanson is gay. I think 2024 GOP field will be include Pence, Haley, and Crenshaw. Sinafan, you might be right, but it depends who wins in 2020, right? Like, if are they coming in? Are we coming in against a Democrat or what? Any ANCAP general libertarian book recommendations? Yeah, the problem with political authority by Michael Huemer, Libertarianism, a primer by Jacob Hubert, um, For New Liberty by Rothbard, Machinery of Freedom by David D. Friedman, um, Towards a New Libertarianism, or Towards a New England Libertarianism, that I did a review on a couple months ago. What else would be good? Probably Power and Market by Rothbard. You could read Man, Economy, and State, or you could just read The Power and Market at the end. That would be pretty good. And yeah, those would all be good ones for general ANCAP stuff. That is a great story about your career. I thought it was kind of boring, but thank you. Um, what do you think of the FIRE movement? Those are the people who want financial independence through minimalist living and retire early. See, I thought FIRE was the free speech on campus organization. I mean, look, FIRE. I mean, that sounds fine. Like, there's lots of different. I'm pretty. Everyone has a different life plan, and that's what people want. They should, and taxes and regulations actually make that much harder. Um, if you look at like the tiny house movement, tiny house people get persecuted all the time by like municipalities. Like, you can't have a tiny house there. That doesn't fit our tax code, and sometimes they have to like live in secret and shit, which is stupid. And it's also, how are we going to tax that? It's hard because they just hook up the trailer and they move someplace else. So, I'm in full support of that. I wouldn't say that it's for everybody, but for those who want to pursue it, that's good for them. Pence is useless and totally uninspiring. Tucker Carlson and Coulter. Tucker's a smart guy. I don't think he's going to be in politics, though. And Coulter is also very smart, but I think she's toxic. Trump's VP shortlist was Pence, Christie, Gingrich. Oh, I'll take Pence over those three, thank you. And I think he chose Pence because he was the least amount of baggage. Yeah, that's probably why. And that's a good reason. I'm voting for Trump. Sue me. Have you ever read The Ego and His Own by Max Stirner? No, but I have read Ego and Hubris about Michael Malice. Libertarianism Today by Hubert. It's Libertarianism and Primer by Boaz. I'm not a big fan of David Boaz, so I haven't recommended that, but I haven't read it either, so it could be better than I'm giving him credit. Uh, I think Pence was necessary to shore up evangelical wing of the GOP. It was assumed Trump would have low turnout among evangelical voters. Yeah, I think it's something like that. I think it's something like that. Uh, my college was so liberal, I kept my mouth shut on political stuff in class generally. Senior year, I joined Young Americans for Liberty. It was filled with right-wing authoritarians. I felt so alone. Well, I joined Young Americans for Freedom, and it was probably much worse than that because they were, not libertarians at all, and they said so. And yeah, they would bash Basquiat, and they said, we don't want to get rid of the state. We want to use the state to fucking fight leftists. There's a certain type of uppity, the right wing. They hate the left. Who did I see this? Like the broadest definition of the two groups is that the left hates markets and the right hates the left. So it doesn't mean that the right loves markets. The right has they rhetorically use markets, they rhetorically use capitalism, they actually rhetorically use a lot of libertarian ideas to fight the left because those are the strongest arguments against the left. But most right-wing people are not dedicated to them or in any kind of principled way. There are exceptions. David Stockman, I think, really does believe in the free market to a very large extent, as an example. But most of them don't, and they're big government people when it comes to the military or to the police or even public works. A lot of them are into obviously like economic nationalism and tariffs and protectionism. So, but on the other hand, conservatives really don't have any rhetoric to fight the left other than libertarian rhetoric. So they're constantly invoking Hayek and Mises and Rothbard and Ayn Rand or whoever else because they're not going to invoke Russell Kirk or Nisbet or any people like that because their stuff just isn't as good. Why are you not a big fan of David Boaz? I don't know. Just um, I think that it's because I was so much in. I'm much. There shouldn't be camps here. We should all get along. But like I was much more in the Mises side, and the Beltway Libertarian Cato Reason side didn't rub me the same way. They didn't. Their passion. It's not fair because they've done a lot of great work, and like many of them are just as principled as anybody else. But they were so many of them are so eager to smear the Mises people in a way that I think is unfair. That it kind of leaves. I mean, when you have someone like Ed Crane writing a essay about the history of libertarianism and he doesn't mention Murray Rothbard, it's like fuck you, dude, fuck you. And again, Ed Crane isn't everybody there, but when I've listened to Boaz speak, it just seems very anodyne. And there's I think it's a Murray Rothbard quote who's like, "Do you hate the state or not?" And there's people who are minarchists who hate the state. Like they're minarchists who are like, it's necessary evil, but goddamn, we fucking hate the state. And Rothbard would find more kinship than them with somebody who's like, oh, I don't really hate the state. I just think that like we get better outcomes if the marginal utility, blah blah blah. And Rothbard was specifically criticizing somebody like David Friedman, which I mean, I think David Friedman does hate the state, but he doesn't have that vitriol, like blood boiling anger. And the thing is, I feel that more than the latter. And I do think a lot of the Beltway libertarians are a little cool kids club kind of thing. And so that's not totally fair to him. So I'm not going to criticize him all the time, which I don't think I have. But yeah. Do you follow Morgan's Wizard on Twitter? She's awesome. I'm not on Twitter at all, so I don't follow anybody. Are you a fan of the Cato lawyer Adam Bates? I'm not familiar with him, so no, I'm not a fan because I don't know him. It was Brian Kaplan who said the left hates markets. Parasia, I probably saw that on your episode, to be honest. Um, I hope the pandemic causes most universities to collapse. They are a scam, provide little more than another item to check off a resume. That's all true, and some of them are going to collapse. Um, Vosh's friend Maudie calls himself a Marxist capitalist. Well, whatever that means. Um, aside from COVID, politics seems to be continually less about actual policy and more about culture war. Yep, yep. We hate you, you hate me. We're a happy family. I have a problem with both Cato and Mises. What I dislike about Cato is that they want to not be embarrassed by the Mises libertarians in their approach to libertarianism. Yeah, they seem quick to condemn. Oh, we're not like them. Like who? Lou Rockwell? And it's funny too because the Mises people will point this out. Tom Woods points this out all the time. Like, oh, so it's beyond the pale to, you know, support Murray Rothbard, but you can support the Iraq War. That's okay, right? So they want to pander. They feel I don't want to say they all are like this, but there's a willingness to pander to the mainstream that, in some respects, can be really sickening. Some of them, not all. Look, Cato does a lot of. I have a lot of friends who work there. Cato does a lot of great stuff, and so does Reason. Um, so I don't think that they should. We definitely should not. They're not. They're, no one should consider. Nobody should be considered themselves enemies. We're all allies. We maybe just differ in our emphasis. Um, how much longer will nation states remain the main political unit? Good question. I don't know. It's a balance of technology and ideology. And as technology changes faster and faster, it's harder to predict how long it will last and what will change. Because you could see it going to where they become even more entrenched, or you could see them falling apart. Depending on how it develops. What I don't like about Mises is the people is they idolize Ron Paul too much and they try and appeal to paleoconservatives too much. Well, I don't think you should idolize anybody, but Ron Paul deserves an awful lot of respect. I think he's earned that, and I think he's right about almost everything. He's been mistaken on a couple things, and I think he's senile now, and he said some stupid stuff recently, but that was long after Mises had already been very much, in his corner. And I think he earned that right for them to be in his corner. Appealing to paleo conservatives, I don't mind that as long as they're not surrendering their principles. If they follow their principles, it's different, but I don't know that they are. Um, did you know Donald Trump briefly ran the Reform Party primaries in 2000 against Pat Buchanan? Yeah, he toyed with it. I don't think he actually ever like formally ran though. What argument convinced you that intellectual property is not property? Well, I was definitely influenced by Stephen Kinsella's article on that. Um, it's it's infinitely reproducible. So when you're not stealing any physical thing, and also the idea that like if I say something and it's an idea and now you have that idea, we both have that idea. This is the thing. So it's not like if I put out a new formula for a type of plastic, and you get it, we both have it now. This is not the case with other types of property. This is one of the things. Property needs to be excludable, and that's not excludable. So like we both have it now. We both equally have that same formula, that same idea, that same bit of information. So it's not like you took it and I no longer have it, which would be the case with, you know, a book or a car or anything like that. So that's why I think Kinsella was right about all that. Do you play any video games? No, I'm not a gamer. I played some when I was a kid. I was never that big into it, and I'm not into it at all now. What do you think makes a private arms companies versus nationalized state-owned weapons R&D? I've always worried the former had the incentive to promote war. Uh, well, they both do. I mean, the state is more likely to go to war, and because the state has, I think your worry is justified. Like a company that sells arms, uh, you know, it's possible that they want to sell guns, and if they think a war will help them sell guns, then they might want a war. But if they're also they don't have armies, they don't have taxation, so they're more vulnerable. They don't want a war to happen to them, and they don't want their customers to be destroyed or whatever. So I'm not saying that that's wrong, but the problem with is the incentives are much worse for a state, right? They're much more insulated. The leaders are insulated from their decisions to a large extent. They have a tax base, so I think it's much worse with states. But I'm not going to say that's not a problem because it is. Um, I think that the problem would be potentially that an anarcho-capitalist society would be sufficiently technologically advanced and wealthy that you could see people who could just equip small mercenary bands that are much more potent and effective and have them go into profit seeking um, wars, but they would only be doing that against not to justify this, but I think they would only be doing this against top targets that were relatively easy to do, right? So they wouldn't get into a protracted war. They would only be willing to fight where they had a cost-effective way to win, and that depends on a certain disparity in wealth and technology, which might mean going against state societies actually or not. So I think the more parity of power there is, the less likely that is. That's to be honest, that's also true with states. The greater the parity of power, the less likely they are to fight. They're much more likely to fight when you have a disparity in power than the more powerful one feels like it can risk it. So with what's the best overall libertarian book? I'm biased to uh, for New Liberty, but mostly because that's what I'm first converted me. Had to evaluate books when you're hearing the argument for the 100th time. Yeah, that's true. Um, for New Liberty is a great book, so I do recommend it. What did Ron Paul recently say that you thought was stupid? Well, he said some stupid stuff when the Russians took over the Crimea. Now, I agree that we shouldn't have gone to war there, but he made it sound like that wasn't a land grab and, an aggressive act on the Russians, which it was. And also, he said something that's stupid recently about COVID-19. I don't remember what it was, though. Um, do you plan to buy a house sometime? I have not decided if I want to buy a house or not. Every time I listen to Peter Schiff, I'm like, nah, I shouldn't. And then other times I feel like I should. So I haven't decided. Anatomy of the State is my favorite Rothbard book. It's more of a essay, isn't it? Did you go to a racially diverse school? No. I mean, there were definitely. It was a college town, so there definitely were. There were some Africans there. There were Jews there, but it was mostly white. I think it was like 94% white, something like that. Um, some Latin Americans, but it was mostly white. So I don't know. That probably doesn't count as diverse. Economically speaking, there was some diversity. There was nobody who was super rich. Like in my town, I don't think there was anybody who was very rich. I mean, there are people who were doing well, but like I don't know if that there might have only been like one family of millionaires or something like that. And then there were definitely people who were really poor. I mean, there were people who didn't have electricity, who didn't have power, living in trailer homes, homeless people, that sort of thing. That was there, but racially, no, was not very diverse. Remember when Jesse Ventura did his conspiracy theory show? Don't you wish he did an episode on OKC? That would have been wonderful. But he did an episode, and I actually did. You can find a video I did on that called Jesse Ventura's Bullshit Conspiracy Theory, and he did an episode on something that dealt with something really close to where I live. So he did an episode on like the Great Lakes getting robbed of all their water. He was alleging that all the water in the Great Lakes was getting stolen, and they had built um, part of the conspiracy was there's a bottling plant called an Ice Mountain. So if you ever get bottled water, this is Ice Mountain in it, and it says bottled in Morley, Michigan. That was really close to where I grew up, just a few miles away. And I remember when they built the factory. It's relatively recent, and the well is actually on a place that's called a sanctuary. And he did a whole thing where he goes to the sanctuary to check out where they're pumping the water out, because it's really nefarious. And the sanctuary is surrounded by two 12-foot fences. It's a 12-foot high fence, and there's two of them. And he was like, "What are they hiding? Why do they have two 12-foot fences around here? This is weird. Why just to defend, just to stop an aquifer? That's ridiculous." And then he's like, "They call it a sanctuary. Give me a break." Well, yeah, it is a sanctuary. It's a deer sanctuary. Entrepreneurs built a farm basically to grow deer, and then rich people pay them thousands of dollars to shoot bucks. And so you have two 12-foot fences so they don't jump out. And it's been there. That was there 30 years before they built the water bottling plant. And anybody there could have told him that. In fact, there's just no way he could not have known that. And he just pretended otherwise to make it seem like there was a big conspiracy theory. And so and if I had not lived there and seen that place and known what it was all along, I would have seen that episode and be like, wow, that is a little scary. Why do they have two 12-foot fences around? What are they trying to protect? They got aliens back there? No, they got these bucks and deer that don't want jumping away so they can sell them for thousands of dollars. So, um, and then you have to wonder how many of the other episodes had similar bullshit that you just wouldn't be able to pick up. So it really kind of turned me off onto that series, which was otherwise a fun series. And I actually genuinely like Ventura and I think he's genuine, but that was just such bullshit that it really kind of turned me off. Do you think that economies, markets, culture, networks are in a sense alive? And I think it's useful to anthropomorphize them in that way, but you don't want to take it too far and start pretending like it's a living body. So it's useful rhetorically, but literally, no, I don't think that they're alive. Book recommendations on Israel Palestine. Yes, the um, a good one is The Prime Ministers, which is by Yehuda Avner, which is from the perspective of just the prime ministers. So that's the Israeli perspective. Another one is the Olive Branch and the Gun. The Olive Branch and the Gun is a good overview. Um, Another one would be Truman and Israel. I think Truman and the Secret History of the Foundation of Israel is a good one. Let's see. What's another good one? I mean, that's a good. Those three would be a good starter. Um, oh, Goliath, uh, Life in Greater Israel by what's his name? He's a left-wing dude. Forget his name. That's a good book. Yeah, I did a review on that. If you look on my channel, there's a book, Goliath. I think it's Goliath, Love and Loathing in Greater Israel, by anyone remember the name of that book? Let me check. Mm, some Jewish. He's one of those, anti-Israel left-wing Jews guy. It's probably not even on Amazon anymore. Yeah, Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel by Max Blumenthal. That's a good one. Also, anything by Norman Finkelstein is probably a good idea to read as well. Chutzpah, The Holocaust Industry, those are all good. Uh, oh, I didn't even see that you mentioned that. Is Image and Reality by Norman Finkelstein good? I haven't read Image and Reality, so I can't say. But in general, I really do like Norman Finkelstein's writing on this. He's pretty good. I've read Chutzpah and The Holocaust Industry, and I like them both a lot. Did you visit Henry Ford's son's mansion while staying in Michigan? No. Uh, Ventura is pretty libertarian when it comes to civil liberties and foreign policy, but on economics, he's a serious mixed bag. Yeah, it sounds like more right than wrong, but wrong on some pretty big doozies. Did you largely ignore pop culture in your teen years? Well, we didn't have the internet, so yes. I mean, I wasn't. I would say yeah. I think that's fair. Um, I kind of like how the Indian government declared the Ganges River to be human just to get Indians to stop defecating, throwing garbage in it. Oh, I don't think they stopped doing that, Gregory Malchuk. I don't think they stopped. Um, for example, he wants to abolish the IRS and income tax and replace it with a national sales tax. But he also wants a maximum wage that makes less than 0 cents to me. Yeah. Well, he's a pro wrestler and a Navy SEAL, so, will you make a Goodreads account so people can see the books you've read and review and your reviews of them? I do reviews on my channel, so I don't see why I would do a Goodreads reads one. Book recommendations about the Davidian Massacre. Well, the Davidian Massacre would be a good one to start with. That's probably the best one that I've read. Um, David Thibodeau's book is probably good, and I mean, yeah, I guess you could read Gary Nestler's. Gary Nestler wrote an account of it as well. That might be worth reading as well. I haven't read it though. Have you studied Japanese history in depth? No. The books that I've read on Japanese history were all about in the modern period. Uh, basically after the end of the shogunate and the Meiji Restoration, and since then, and especially going up to World War II. So I would not consider that in depth at all. Obviously, I know a little bit, but it's just a little bit. Actually, what else is here? Against All Odds, Israel Survives. Oh yeah, I'm sure that's a great book. We have nukes and my popular weapons, and we defeated guys with stones. Yay. Yeah, I would definitely say. Let me get this right. The Gun and the Olive Branch. Yeah, The Gun and the Olive Branch by David Hurst, Hirst. And then what's the other one? I don't see the other one, but the it's like Truman and the Foundation of the State of Israel. Let me see. Truman, Israel. Genesis, Truman, American Jews, and the Origins of the Arab-Israeli Conflict by John B. Judas. That's a very good book. I'd recommend that. Have you read Chasing the Scream by Jonathan Hari? No. Um, I get the feeling there is really a shortage of libertarian content, YouTube, podcasts, etc. I feel like there's lots of opportunity right now for people interested in creating content. But there's actually quite a few. There's actually tons of libertarian podcasts, and I don't know. There's actually a lot that's on YouTube. It just seems, I don't know. Like back in 2007, 8, it seemed like there was a ton of like libertarian YouTube channels that were very discussion based and debating ideas and discussing ideas. So I'm thinking like Liberty is Not Given, Ex Omniverse, Austro Libertarian. I was even thinking there was a guy named Tumbleweed Joe, Brain Police 2, Fringe Elements in his one of his iterations was that. And I feel like YouTube has just kind of changed, and that's just not the vibe anymore. I feel like I'm very much a dinosaur for having vlogs like this and talking about stuff like this still. Um, but there's still, I mean, there's tons, and most of the like, there at one point like everyone I was subscribed to was a libertarian YouTuber, and like none of them make content. Most of them never do. Some of them like every couple years, like Aaron 883 will every once in a while like, hey, I still exist, but they just kind of got over with YouTube. Um, and it's kind of it's really weird. It seems like the market gets cornered by certain types. So stuff on Molyneux became successful and grew, and Fringe Elements in his own way to a lesser extent, but his own demographic. Of course, he's not really a libertarian anymore, but and the smaller and more moderate voices or moderate sized kind of stopped or morphed. But there's so many libertarian podcasts. There's way more than I could ever listen to. Um, so I mean, there's a market. I think though you almost have to niche it and like have other things that you talk about. Now, I did not start talking about foreskin and restoration or communal showers cynically to do that. It's because I'm honestly very interested. In fact, I'm sure many of you think that I'm too interested in those things, and that's fine. But I think without that angle, you almost don't even have anything to offer, generically speaking. Like, talk to ornithologists or geologists or fucking people who flip houses or whatever. Like, it's almost like you need some kind of gimmicky second aspect to add to it. But I don't know. There's a ton of content out there, so the algorithms are making it harder and harder to find. I feel like too, because there isn't a lot of dialogue. Of all the people that there's only a couple. I mean, Parisia has been recently. You and I have made content relative to each other, and I know one or two. I can only think the only other YouTuber I know who ever makes content and reply to me is Poe the person, and vice versa. So it's very rare where that there used to be a lot more of an exchange that was going on, and I really encourage people to do that. Ivan the Heathen would be another one. I really encourage him to start making videos, and he has made videos, but he doesn't make them very often. Which is his prerogative. He makes excellent videos. He's super smart, and he really can dig into topics a lot. And I was encouraging people to have a dialogue and to have their own videos, and just very few people end up doing it. And so it ends up being kind of like, it's not a one-man show, but it's like there's like 1,000 one-man shows. There's like 1,000 people or more who are doing their own thing, but then they're not communicating with each other that much, unless they're on like an upper. It could just be that there's just other levels, and I'm just not on that level. So you've got Dave Smith, right? I love his podcast, and all his stuff's on YouTube. So I love Part of the Problem. I don't love it as much, but I do enjoy Michael Malice's show. So there's people like that, but I don't know. It's just very strange. First, there you get like this kind of. There's a lot of eddying, and there's a lot of like bifurcation where, you know, Malice and Smith and Tom Woods and Scott Horton and Pete Quinones, they all talk to each other over and over again, and then this group. You get the same thing with like the atheist community does that, where they all talk to each other, and then there's layers below that. I'm several layers below those guys, so like they never talk to me, I never talk to them, and the guys at my layer, there's just I don't know that there is anybody at this level. There's people who are below. There's people out there with 10 subscribers, 20 subscribers, and they get 4 views, 5 views, and then there's people who get tens of thousands, and there isn't a lot of vertical dialogue going on, and if you're at the right level, there's some horizontal going on, but if you're at the wrong level, there's not a lot. So again, I just remember it used to be a lot of, if I did a video like this, they would probably all watch my stuff, and then some of them would make replies to that, and then you get replies on replies on replies, and there'd be like this conversation going back and forth. And honestly, I came in after that was over, and you can watch my video, the decline and fall of the rise and fall of the YouTube ANCAPs. Like I started making videos in 2011, and like honestly, it was kind of over. Like that ship had sailed. Like I really think I waited too long, and like the incentives and the dynamic of YouTube had changed, and also a lot of the initial people just were tired of it, and they moved on in their lives. They got tired of talking about the roads and talking about gun control or whatever it was, and they moved on. But now that dynamic is not there anymore, and that is kind of sad. Who is the most likely country to use their nukes in the next 50 years? The United States. History says it's the United States. The most powerful country is the most likely to use them, in my opinion. Which means the second most likely country to do it is probably China. I read Hari's books about connections. It seems to be about solving the emotional depressive issues by way of government enacting socialism to form connections. Disliked it a lot. Yeah, I've never heard of it, not familiar with it, and I have not read it. I've wondered the same thing. Will a Mexican USA or a Islamic Britain or France be more likely to use nuclear weapons? Honestly, maybe Pakistani or India, probably not Russia or China. I actually think China and the United States are the most likely. Pakistan has nukes and they haven't used them, so I don't know. It's actually hotly debated in the Islamic world whether you can use nukes or not, so I'm not sure I agree. And North Korea has them, for Christ's sake, so... the thing is, nobody wants to watch it compared to owning the SJW compilations and guys who react to articles. Yeah, that's fair. And like, I'll be honest, Stephen, who doesn't love watching? There's this whole genre of Ben Shapiro owns the libs, and like, I'll be honest, I enjoy those videos too. Now, often they're not that good of a mic drop. For every Jordan Peterson versus that one reporter, there's 1,000 other videos that claim to be that or are not that. And that has kind of become what it is. And again, I won't deny, like I can enjoy that, but how productive is that, and how interesting is that really? And the answer is it's not. It's kind of like a tribal. It's like a sport, and you're coming on to watch somebody get owned. Like that's what people are really looking for. And um, Aaron 0883, yeah, and like he comments every once in a great while. Like if I ever say anything and he happens to see it, he'll comment, and which I honestly didn't know, but like it's just they moved on, and YouTube, and also not only did they move on, YouTube moved on. What's your opinion on the men's rights movement? I mostly agree with it. I think that the state on net, I don't know if this was on purpose or not. There's a chance that it was. Um, Discriminates against men, and that's sad. That sucks. I'll say my thinking here was shaped very heavily by a novel titled Blind Baseball. Look up the novel Blind Baseball. It was recommended by Joseph Sobran years ago. That's a great novel. He called it the 1984 of domestic law or whatever. So I don't think there was ever a president who sat down and said, I hate men and let's divide up the family because it will be good for the state. Although I do think that's happening in China with like the Uyghurs. But what you do have is like these bureaucracies that are staffed by motivated left-wing people like the CPS or the various other agencies, and they can end up being full of people who have an axe to grind in the culture war, and they use their bureaucracy to wage that war, and they do that. The EPA does that, the ATF does that, the FBI does that, CPS does that, and so it's not like the president decided to do it necessarily. Not to give them any credit, they're fucking warmongers themselves, but like that really happens. And so I think the laws have become really discriminatory towards men. Um, I see those YouTube libertarians more commenting on Facebook than on YouTube. Some of them, yes. Some of them, no. I'm not. I guess I'm not Facebook friends with all of them. Bitbutter, George Oughta Help could be a huge libertarian channel, but he doesn't make videos that often. Yeah, I agree. His stuff was brilliant. High production value too, and that was another thing. Um, like vlogs like this they're like no production value. Like I've got my camera sitting on a pillow, and it's a camera I bought 10 years ago and whatever, and there's no fancy screens and there's no editing and there's none of that. And I understand like, whoa, that's adding value and it's more snazzy and whatever, and I get it. But from my point of view, I don't care about that because you don't convey an idea better that way. You don't have a better discussion that way. So for me, that doesn't seem important. But the market of YouTube, that is important. Having something that's looks high quality and all that, that's what they really want. And so it's like you're raising the cost of entry to say, hey, if you want to have a lot of subscribers and you want to have a lot of success, you got to have a studio and you've got to have co-hosts and you've got to have snazzy editing and a film and a whatever, a theme song and graphics and all that stuff. And you can do all that, and I'm not saying those things are bad, and I really appreciate the people who take the time and put in the effort, but you're increasing the effort 1,000 times or 100 times, but then the content in terms of ideas is not any better at all. You haven't advanced the ideas at all. So for me, that's always been like, why would I mean, I guess you do it so you have a bigger audience, maybe potentially, but you don't have better ideas. So to me, it just seemed like stupid. Um, like, I mean, I've infamously, I've done videos without my shirt on before, and look, I still never lived that down. I have people, somebody apparently one of my subscribers at one point showed a video I did to Tom Woods, and I wasn't wearing a shirt, and Tom Woods was like, if he's not wearing a shirt, I'm not going to watch it. So, fair enough, I guess. If you notice, I wear a shirt most of the time now, but uh, I think the libertarian podcast community is bigger than the 2007, 2010 libertarian YouTube community. Well, and how do you even measure that, Pentazoid? Because most of the libertarian podcasts are also, broadcast onto YouTube. In fact, I watch most of the podcasts on YouTube. There's very few that I listen to as podcasts, but there are many, many, many libertarian podcasts. Many, 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 many. More than I've heard, more than any of you all have heard, I'm sure. Um, the vast majority of them are teeny tiny. Um, Mm. There used to be a ton of white nationalists on YouTube. Was that true? I didn't watch enough of them to know. Is it just me, or do you think YouTube censors more people today than they used to? I think that's true. There used to be a lot more copyrighted movies and TV shows on here. Yeah, they definitely clamped down on all that stuff. Um, do you think the success of Dubai, Singapore, and to some extent Hong Kong, minus defense, shows the city-state are once again viable? Yeah, I'd say that's a fairly fair thing to. I think that's a fairly fair conclusion to come to. Uh, Dave Smith's okay. I like Dave Smith a lot. Uh, I like Status Quo. I like historian-based libertarian podcasts. I guess I don't watch or listen to any that are historian-based. Brian Kaplan's book on parenting, Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids, convinced me that all of Molyneux's theories on parenting are completely crackpot. So I have that book and I've never read it. What of Molyneux's theories did he make you realize were crackpot? The copyright anarchy ended in 2008 with the Viacom lawsuit. Post 2016, the political censorship intensified. It sounds about right. Are those small ANCAP YouTubers on new platforms like DTube? Not that I know of. I'm not on DTube at all. I don't know what's there. Um, does anyone ever say pond anymore? I think some people do. ContraPoints got absolutely loaded from YouTube leftism without ownage videos. I think people want production value and hot topics like transgender issues. Well, production value, I think you're absolutely right. People like that for whatever reason. Well, I guess you could say they appreciate it. Like, hey, you went into this effort, so we want to watch you. Okay, that's fair. But to me, it's like, well, what's the content? What are we talking about? Uh, is Dreadnought your favorite book on the history of World War II? No. First of all, Dreadnought is about the history of World War One, Pentazoid. And it is one of my favorite books on the history of World War One. But actually, one of my favorite history books on World War Two, which I will do a review when it's finally over, is a three-part series on the war in the Pacific, but it's not done because the third part is not out yet, is this trilogy here, The Pacific Crucible by Ian Tull. This is a three-part. The first two are out. The third one is supposed to be out this year, but it got delayed. This is probably my favorite book on the Pacific War of World War II. So look up Ian Tull, The Pacific Crucible. Uh, I'm really behind, but I love the story of how you drove to random rigs asking for a job for weeks. Awesome story. It only took a day. It only took a day to get a number. I remember in the past you talked about abortion with this analogy of a boat and a stowaway. Do you remember the author of that original content? Uh, so that was definitely a reaction to the evictionist argument, the Walter Block arguments. I don't remember if I read that someplace else or I came up with that, independently or on my own, because I thought that was a really good analogy. You can't. It's fine to evict somebody off your property, but if you kidnap somebody and put them in your boat and then take them into the middle of the ocean and be like, I'm evicting you, the only reason they're on your boat is because you put them there. So they didn't trespass, you put them there. And when you conceive a child, they didn't sneak into your womb, they didn't, break in, they didn't trespass, you put them there. Or if you were raped, the rapist put them there, but it's not their fault, it's the rapist's fault, or both of your faults in 99% of cases. So I don't remember reading that someplace else. That was a long time ago. I think the first video I did on that topic was way back in like 2011. And I've used the analogy many times since then. Nowadays, I use the analogy of if you hurt somebody with your car, the idea that if you hit somebody with your car, you can't say, I wasn't trying to hit them. I was just going to go to the store and it just happened by accident and I didn't mean it. Okay, that's wonderful. We're not going to charge you with manslaughter, but like you're still responsible and you owe this person restitution. And if they have to go to a hospital bed for 9 months and be on life support, that's on you. And so I prefer that example more. But the whole boat in the ocean trespasser was this idea that, yeah, it's one thing if he's a stowaway. If you didn't know, if somebody sneaks on, I would say you probably shouldn't. The penalty for trespass isn't death. So like evicting them in a way that will kill them is probably itself too much of, like you're committing your own rights violation, although it's more questionable. But in the case where, um, ooh, um, so the case of I got distracted by a Harvard boy, excuse me. Oh my gosh, grinding hard, guys, grinding hard. But yeah, I think the evictionist argument, I use that metaphor to kind of show that I think the trespassing evictionist argument doesn't work, and I don't know that I read that someplace else. Um, near New leaf gun ban incoming. By the way, it includes ARs, Mini 14s. What's a new leaf gun? Elliot, I don't understand a leaf gun ban. Speaking of Singapore, what do you think about the caning? Well, I believe that in restitution, I believe in torts and restitution, and that's punitive, so I don't believe in that. Um, Obviously, there's worse things they could do, but um, what's the most radical revisionist history book you agree with, buy into? I would say one of them would be uh, enslaving freemen or freeing slaves, enslaving freemen. That might be, one of the most massive in terms of its revisionism and changing how you pick. Another one would be the War with Many Fathers. This guy right here, which doesn't let Hitler off the hook, but basically blames all the Allies for World War II. What would be another good one? Sheesh. I don't know. I don't think. I haven't read it, but Robert Stinnett's book's probably pretty revisionist. The Day of Deceit. Um, well, I mean, Conceived in Liberty by Murray Rothbard definitely would be on that list. What would be another good one? Here's one by Butler Schaefer. Butler Schaefer. In Restraint of Trade is a good one. A revisionism of the Progressive Era. Um, and The Roosevelt Myth by John T. Flynn would be another good one. Do you know State Star Codex? David Friedman is a frequent commenter on that blog. Good content with lots of smart people, but article on circumcision was terrible. Earp commented on the article. No, I'm not familiar with the State Star Codex. If you can, send me a link of the article. I'll take a look. I'd be curious. What was terrible about it? Leaf is slang for Canadian. They're going for gun control again. I'm surprised it took this long with fucking Fidel Castro's son there. That's terrible. Canada is the one country that's kind of hemmed and hawed. They did the long rifle ban and then they undid it. And I'm actually surprised that Trudeau hasn't done more sooner. But do you really want a prime minister that routinely wears blackface to take guns away from black people? Um, Could you upload pictures of your bookshelf so people can see titles of the books you have? I don't know where I would do that. I could maybe run the camera by it slowly, but maybe I'll do that one day. I'll do the "This is what's on my bookshelf" episode, and I'll let everyone see everything. Um, do you dislike ebooks or something? I listen to audiobooks. I do actually dislike ebooks. So I prefer physical books. Justin Trudeau is so creepy. Yeah, he's definitely a piece of work. Got any book recommendations on World War One, political lead up to, or soldier life rather than battle tactics preferred? Yeah, absolutely. Dreadnought. Germany, Britain, and the Coming of the Great War. This is an excellent book that's basically only about the lead up to the war. Um, this is actually my World War One shelf right here. So, you know, um, this is a classic, Guns of August, the outbreak of the First World War. So, definitely would recommend this. Um, Ring of Steel, Germany, the Austro-Hungarian in World War II, People's War. So there's two. Um, World War One is one where people always debate who's to blame. So this is the book that blames Germany. There's another one called The Russian Origins of the First World War, which I would recommend reading both so you can kind of get a balanced perspective. And I'll do one more. This is an excellent, excellent, excellent book. Totes has done some great work. He's actually some. And speaking of revision, this and his book, The Wages of Destruction on World War II in Germany, I would consider revision, and they're very good. Um, oh, and I can't believe, not that people would think of this book typically, but if we're talking about revision, there's probably one author who stands out in my head is where everything he wrote was basically revision. Anthony C. fucking Sutton. This is a there's 3 volumes to this. This is the hardest book for me to find. Of all the books I've ever wanted to own, it took me years and years and years and hundreds of dollars. Volume 2. Like volume 3, I couldn't even get a cover. Volume 3, this was so hard for me to find. I actually had a friend at a library. I wasn't in college anymore. A friend was able, the library did not have it. Michigan State, where I went, they had 17 million books in the library, and they had this. That was it. Um, but I was able to, none of the libraries in Michigan had it, but they had exchange programs with other libraries. I got volume 3 from another library. I took it to Staples, and I photocopied the whole thing. And then a couple years later, it came out. But he also did a series on the Bolsheviks and the Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, Wall Street and the Nazis, and most famous of all, national suicide. So look up Anthony C. Sutton and national suicide. Those are among, they're very revisionist about the Cold War. Actually, another good one about the Cold War that's a good revision on that would be Depression War and Cold War by Robert Higgs. I download the ebook and end up buying the physical copy later. I end up doing a lot on audiobook now. How much do you squat? Like for one rep, like 300 pounds, maybe, like on a good day. Have you seen the video of Joe Biden talking about his hairy legs? I have. It's beautiful. It's like the Gettysburg Address of modern age. The Sleepwalkers by Christopher Clark is supposed to be incredible. Sleepwalkers is about what? About what? What do you think about the whole alpha male, beta male dichotomy? I think it's very real. I don't think that everybody is necessarily one or the other, but it's very real. That's definitely a thing. 100% that's a thing. I should do a whole video on the submissive domination thing. Maybe I'll do a live stream on that, but that's definitely true. What's the steel book on World War One called again? Ring of Steel. By Watson. Writing all these down. Yeah, those are great. I don't have. It's called Russian Origins of the First World War. Don't have it on my bookshelf here, but I would definitely pair that with the German Origins of World War II and Dreadnought. Every one of those is basically blamed. So Dreadnought is blaming the British and the Germans. Fisher is blaming the Germans, and the Russians are blaming the Russians. So it does seem that, like, of all the countries involved, the United States gets the least blame. France gets the next least blame. And then Serbia probably after that. It's Serbia, but then Russia, Germany, and England get a lot of blame, and Austria-Hungary also gets a lot of blame. I got that Sutton book at an ebook. Yeah, at some point, it took me years. It took me about 10 years to get all those. And not long after I got the third one, somebody came out with PDFs, and there are PDFs of them circulating. And I might even have them on my computer. I don't know because I have the physical copies. But they were by far the hardest books for me to find. I would literally check Amazon like every week, and they just never even had copies, or occasionally they'd have one for like $1,000. Uh, why are the Sutton books so hard to find? That's a really, really interesting question, Pentazoid. So, um, Sutton was at the Hoover Institute, which is where our Thomas Sowell is, for instance, and he came out with National Suicide, I think in the early 70s, maybe the mid 70s. And the premise of National Suicide was that during the Vietnam War, American fighter pilots, when they would attack North Vietnamese industry, would say, the North Vietnamese are driving around in Ford trucks. Not just trucks, Ford trucks. Wait a second, why did the communist North Vietnamese, why did they have Ford trucks? Well, it turned out the reason they had Ford trucks was because the Gorky plant in Russia, where they made the trucks, was a copy of Ford's River Rouge plant. Ford had built this giant plant in the 20s at River Rouge in Michigan, or Rouge River, excuse me. No, it's River Rouge. It's the French version, so Mississippi River Rouge, yeah, River Rouge. And the architect of that went to Russia and built a copy of that, and then the Russians got the plans for Ford tractors and Ford trucks and all these. Not I'm just using Ford as an example. And so Sutton started doing all this work on this topic, and he basically said the entire Soviet industry is basically a copy of especially the American industry, and their goods are copies of American goods and whatnot. And it was actually funny. There's a former Soviet guy on YouTube, and it's called the Ushanka Show. If you look up Ushanka Show, and he was talking about when they first got when they first got their VCRs, and he's got this very dry sense of humor, and he goes, "Well, we had a VHS player in the Soviet Union, came out in 1985, and he says the name in Russian like Vitekta Miloska Migotska, like video magnetic strip tape. He goes, and our VSCR, it ironically look exactly like Panasonic. So I joke was that I'm doing him no justice. Go look up the video. Uh, it was a copy of a Panasonic, and just like all their vehicles were copies, but they were really bad copies because communism fucking doesn't work. So Sutton did all this work, and then he did all this work on Wall Street involvement with Hitler and the Bolshevik Revolution. And I've read the one on the Bolshevik Revolution, and it's really good. Basically, when Trotsky lived in America, he had everything paid for by very wealthy people, and when he went to Russia, he was protected by very powerful people. He got held up in Halifax in Canada, and they said, we're allies with Russia. We're not going to send a revolutionary to Russia who could bring down the government there. At that point, the Kerensky government, not the Tsarist government. And somebody powerful was like, let him go. So the idea was that the Soviet Union, the Communist Party, the Bolsheviks, were being helped by highly wealthy Americans like the Rockefellers. And one of the things that happened was, so he published the book, the Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development, and then the John Birch Society started promoting it and saying, hey, everybody, look at this. Our rich capitalists in America are basically supporting communists. They literally support the Bolsheviks, and they support the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union's technology comes from here. They get our grain. They get their grain from here at that point. They were getting most of their grain from Cargill, or not most, but some large amount. And the people in uh, so many like John Birch Society people went out and bought this book that it sold out, and then the printer was unwilling to do another run, so they never did any more printings. It's very similar if you ever heard of Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley. That book got promoted by the John Birch Society, and then the powers that be did not want there to be more copies, and so the original run, apparently Carol Quigley went and said, hey, we sold out, let's do another run. And they're like, we're not doing another run, and we destroyed the plates. What do you mean you destroyed the plates? So kind of a similar thing happened here, and then Sutton went into hiding. You can find there's an interview with him done by Stanley Monteith. Stanley Monteith was one of the more conspiracy theory kind of right-wing evangelical guys. He used to have a show. I think he died probably 10 years ago, but there's an interview from like the 80s where he sits down with Stanley Monteith and Anthony C. Sutton. Good luck finding it. It used to be on YouTube. It's probably not anymore when they purged all the conspiracy theory stuff. But so basically, it was a small supply. There wasn't a big run. And then it became a famous, well-known book. And, the demand was high, the supply was low, and the price went way up. And the same thing happened with a couple books, with the Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development, with Tragedy and Hope. Until recently, they've restarted printing it, although some people say that the new reprints are missing certain important passages. And then another one that's really happened for is Pieces of Eight by Edward Vieira, which is a history of what the definition of money in the Constitution, which he would only do a limited run, and then there's a huge demand, and so the copies are going for hundreds of dollars a piece. Do you consider yourself an alpha male? Why or why not? Immodesty prevents me from answering that, honestly, so I will not. Are you a speed reader? No. Have you read anything by Foucault? And if so, what are your thoughts about his ideas and about BDSM? So I've not read any Foucault, but I have listened to a lot of Thaddeus Russell. And I want to say he's a supporter, but he thinks that Foucault gets a bad rap. Now, Foucault seems like he was a piece of shit because he had HIV and was going around and spreading it on purpose. So, fuck him for that. But Russell says that his ideas are actually kind of fairly libertarian and that he's getting misrepresented. But having not read him, I don't want to speak too much about it because I only know through the prism of what I've heard Russell say, which, Russell would admit was not the best way to learn about it. I'm particularly interested in social pressure to lead to war, stuff like White Feathers Girls. Well, check out those books. They cover all that stuff. Should being a submissive man be considered a developmental disorder? No, I don't think so. I think it's very natural, and a lot of men feel an urge to do that. Have you ever read Herbert Hoover's revisionist history of World War II? So I have it. I haven't read it. It's right. So I've not read it, but I have it. At one point, he talks about if you try and poke a rattlesnake and it bites you, you can't really blame the snake, as a reference to what happened with Pearl Harbor in the United States and Japan. I've heard it's really good, but I have not read it, but here it is. This is devolving into a book. I'll do a whole episode on books. How about that? Okay. I buy the idea that rich capitalists might have supported the Bolsheviks knocking off Russia. I don't know if I buy a rich capitalist wanting to help the USSR over the US during the Cold War. Well, you don't have to buy it. They were. They were giving them technology. They were giving them equipment. They were giving them technical expertise. They could have just been doing it for profit, for money, or they could have been doing it for ideological reasons. I wonder if the powers that be forced the publishers not to publish Sutton's book. So the evidence is good that they did do that with Quigley's book, A Tragedy in Hope. There's pretty good evidence that that's the case because Quigley himself, the author, said, hey, when you sell out a run of books really quickly, which is what they did, you print more because you can make more money. So of course you do that. And the author wanted that done. And the publisher's like, no, we're not doing that. And I don't know how. There was some kind of issue with the rights. And Carol Quigley, oh, he's some random professor. Dude, when Bill Clinton got elected at his first inaugural address, when had his inaugural address, he specifically cited Carol Quigley by name. He said he was my favorite professor at Georgetown, Carol Quigley. So Carol Quigley is somebody who knows something. So he's got his other famous book is the Anglo-American Establishment. And basically, he thinks that there's this elite establishment of English and Americans, and that they run the world, and they're the ones behind the United Nations and the Trilateral Commission and the CFR. And he doesn't have a problem with it. He goes, I think it's great. I just wish that they would be more open about it. So the evidence is really good that somebody did not like that he wrote that book, and they disallowed it being printed again. The evidence is less clear with Sutton's work, uh, but something happened there because they sold out and they didn't print it anymore ever, which is very interesting. What are your thoughts on video games? Well, of course they should be legal, but I think that most people would do better to play them a lot less. I never do, and I think a lot of people ruin their lives with them. So that's my thoughts. The U.S. was selling turnkey chemicals and steel plants to the Soviet Union in the middle of the Cold War. Read the book. None Dare Call It Treason, the first conservative paperback bestseller. And then there's another one, None Dare Call It Conspiracy. That's absolutely true. Um, the I mean, the Soviets did espionage, but most of it was in the open. They would get contracts. They would go to firms and they would say, "We'll give you a contract if you operate. Let's say you operate an oil rig. You know, we have this area that has oil. We want to develop it. Will you come and set up the oil rigs and train the personnel, and then you'll get like a 30-year or 40-year lease to extract." So then they would go and they would set it up, and then as soon as they got everything running, and as soon as the Russians knew how to run it themselves, they would kick them out, and then they would just keep it all, with a few exceptions. And so they did this. They did this with basically every single industry, everything from fucking lumber and timber to oil, gold, uranium, potash, magnesium, the whole nine yards, everything. All their factories, everything, ball bearings. Yeah, I've only read the first volume, which covers 1917 to like 1930, and the next period covers like Lend Lease, which would be kind of the grab bag of everything. So individually, yeah, I suppose there's plenty of incentive for people to take rubles. Was it John Birch Society making the case that it was more widespread though? They were they weren't making the case. They were popularizing it though. They were pointing people to Sutton's research. And Sutton went into hiding. Like Sutton was unreachable. I think he died in like 2000 or maybe 2002. It'd be interesting to go if you can find interviews of him online anymore. There used to be on YouTube. There were interviews with him from back in the 80s, but I haven't seen any in a long time. Any recent thoughts on Bitcoin? I know you haven't talked about it I know you talked about it 7 years ago. Uh, More than 7 years ago, 12 years ago was the first time I went to PorcFest and really learned about it. I don't know. I don't follow it enough to have like a real opinion. And I've always said I don't have the technical knowledge to really judge it very well. Still on books, best really taboo, inflammatory, controversial books. Yeah, that would definitely be Teen 2.0. Like I cannot if I say that the age of consent should be 13 or 14, which is honestly what I believe it should be if you're going to have an age of consent. I actually think it should be based on cognitive ability. But if we had a test for cognitive ability, I think most 13 and 14-year-olds would pass. That's by far going to cause the most problems for me, and it always has. And but I think that book is so well reasoned. And actually, Newt Gingrich actually recommended that book. It's on the back. So Teen 2.0 is definitely in that category. What else? Oh, the culture of critique would also definitely fall in that category. Um, Culture of Critique is I thought was excellent and a very fair book, and I guarantee that that is totally politically taboo and you can never talk about it. And then another one would be like The Surgical Temptation about circumcision. That would be one that no one's. I mean, that's just you don't get a receptive audience from most people. Um, Sun's book on FDR and Wall Street supposedly portrays FDR as a Wall Street financier. I haven't read it. That's funny because FDR was ignorant about financial concepts. Yeah, everything I read is that FDR was a dilettante. He didn't know anything about economics. He was born rich and never had to worry about money and didn't know a thing about it. Um, what book was that about the Soviets nationalizing other people's factories? That's Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development, and it's in 3 volumes, volume 1, 2, and 3. It depends on the game, really. Some games you can pour endless hours into and accomplish nothing. I respect competitive games that help teach emotional regulation and overcoming challenges. Yeah, but you could learn emotional regulation and overcoming challenges in the real world, and then also get in shape and actually also like make friends. Like I learned that in jujitsu, but I can also beat the shit out of you now. And so I don't know, and it's good for my cardio. Watch Andreas Andronopoulos' video or read his books if you want to learn about Bitcoin. All right, guys, let's do last call. Last call on questions. Games are games have more depth than sports and are mentally taxing in a way sports aren't. Are you speaking as an athlete who also is a gamer, or are you speaking as a gamer who is assuming that about athletes? I'd love to know that, Cozy. I feel like you can get everything you can get from a game in real life. And I don't think gamers are not athletic, or if they are, it's not because of they're a gamer, and they're not renowned for their social skills either. I don't know, that's the cliche, but gamers are not known for their high level of social skills. So Sleepwalkers is about World War I. Okay, I'll check it out. Something I've heard about Culture of Critique is that McDonald ignores the huge amount of Gentile students that guys like Boaz had. Well, that's not fair because he doesn't ignore them at all. He talks about how many Gentiles and how they um, a lot of times organizations that are heavily Jewish will gentilify. So like a lot of like the Communist Party USA would usually have a Gentile as their head. Even though whatever 50% of the higher ranking communists were Jews, they would find a Gentile to be the figurehead so that they would look less Jewish than they really were. And I don't think that there's any, he doesn't deny that or ignore that at all. I think that McDonald is very, very fair and he's very, very careful. Now, there's plenty of people. I found this annoying. Like when I did the video on the Trayvon Martin case, the author of the Trayvon hoax is Jewish. But if you read his ideology, is very clearly nationalist American, anti-immigration, for like national harmony. He's for the hegemonic white European WASP culture. And somebody in the comments said, well, he's Jewish, so obviously he hates white America and he wants to balkanize America. And I was like, no, yes, he is Jewish, but if you read, it's very clear he doesn't favor any of the like the critical race theory. He doesn't favor psychoanalytics. He doesn't favor any of that stuff. And the fact that he's Jewish shouldn't matter. Then it's very clear he doesn't. But people look, he's Jewish, so he must believe those things, and that's just wrong. Um, I'm a game developer, and I agree games can be addictive and dangerous. Interactive media has so much value if not turned into cheap Skinner boxes, though. Would you play a multiplayer communal showering game? No, I would rather communal shower in real life. Thank you very much. Do you like Pat Buchanan's book on World War II history? I haven't read it, but I've heard him talk about it, and I like that take. I think his take is very is good, and he also will point out, we went to war for Poland, and then we let Poland get completely fucked, and we helped the Soviet Union, which the Soviet Union was worse than the Nazis. I'm sorry, but there's just no question about that, really. So it makes it much more difficult to just assume that this is the good guys versus bad guys. Learn mid-level Melee or StarCraft and get back to me about how deep most positions in football or entry-level basketball nerd. How about we go on the mats and see who lasts the longest, Cozy, motherfucker. You can I'll even let you bring a controller. You can bring a controller and I'll come out there and I'll throw you on the ground and choke you out in, I don't know, 25 seconds. Or break your arm if I'm feeling bad. That wasn't a threat. That was a friendly challenge, by the way. Obviously, video games should be legal and people should be free to do what they want, including waste their lives. Pat Buchanan gets attacked for talking about the ridiculousness surrounding Poland in his book Hitler, Churchill, and the Unnecessary War. Oh, Gregory Melchick, since I have you here, I am on Discord and I didn't know where to find you. So if there's a place I should search, like a group or a name, let me know what it is and I'll look for it on Discord. Um, is the natural historical trend of human evolution more towards liberty or away from it? I don't know. I really don't know. Because the other problem with that question is, even if we pointed out a trend, we wouldn't know how much of that was evolutionary and how much of it was other reasons. What groups are you in on Discord? I'm not in any. I don't think I'm in any Discord groups. I did not see a response, Gregory. The Allies did. The Allies at Yalta, I think, did well by securing Finland and Austria without having to spend millions of men to secure them. I don't think they did well. I think it's nice for Austria and Finland that they didn't get. And look, Finland especially walked a very, very narrow, line there because they had entered. They fought on the side of the Nazis, although they've been invaded by the Soviet Union. So But they gave up Poland, they gave up Eastern Europe. They eventually ended up giving up China. And as McCarthy pointed out, a big part of the problem was a whole bunch of people in the State Department, especially, were commies or sympathetic to commies. Arthur Herman uses the phrase that many liberals will look into the face of the communists and say that it is half good. Or only half evil. Like they did not see them as evil; they saw them as they're reformers. Stalin's a genuine reformer, and he's a somebody that we can trust and that we can work with. And that was false, and that was a lie, and that was well, not I don't want to say a lie, but that was false, and they condemned hundreds of millions of people as a result. So, hello, Glenn. You're Canadian. You're right at the end. I'm almost done. 2 hours 45 minutes. I read that our immigration politics turned away many Jewish refugees. Yeah, in the lead up to World War II, that's absolutely true. There was a famous case, I forget the name of the ship, but they made it all the way to New York, and FDR had them turn around, and they went back to Europe, and I think they all got killed. And this is what angers me when people pretend like we got into World War II to protect the Jews or whatever. That's false. That's not what we did. We didn't try and end the Holocaust. It's my luck. Well, Glenn, if you feel bad, you can watch it when it's uploaded because it will be uploaded very soon. Video games are super addictive. Uh, we didn't have we didn't have any of these territories though. Uh, could we have just taken them? Well, we could have just not subsidized the Soviets. We could have just not given them things. We gave them a ton of things. We gave them a ton of money. And we could have fought the war differently if we were going to fight it. I obviously don't think we should have been in World War II, but if we were going to fight it, we should have. One of the dumbest things that they did was demand unconditional surrender. If they had gone to the Germans and said, listen, Hitler's got to go, Holocaust has got to end, you got to give up the territories, but we can talk, you know, surrender and there can be an honorable peace, um, or you'll be annihilated. Look, they understood that they were going to lose. That would have been, I don't know if Hitler could have survived for very long in that environment. Um, and they also could have waged the war differently, which is what Churchill, you know, of all those guys, Churchill I don't think is a great hero, but he was the only one who kind of did anything about this. They could have waged a campaign to try and mitigate this by, instead of landing in France, landing in Ljubljana, which is what he was talking about, and then doing an advance through Yugoslavia and through Southern Europe, so that they could then be the ones to first occupy places like Poland. Um, but I think diplomatically, if they had just been more, you don't have the unconditional surrender, because with unconditional surrender, it's like, well, we can't surrender because we don't. They'll do whatever they want to us. Where if it's conditional, you can negotiate, and there's something that you can. It gives you a reason to actually end the war early, which is what they should have done. There's absolutely no reason to demand unconditional surrender. That's another point that Buchanan makes, I think. YouTube had me delete it because it's a link. I'll put a space in it or something, or email me at gregorymelchick@gmail.com. I agree with you. Should not have been in World War II. Yep, that's the big revision, is to not be there. Um, who do you think was more destructive to the world, the Nazis or the Soviets? That's very easy. The Soviets. There's no question about that. Um, Unconditional surrender probably would not have secured Eastern Europe, though. Well, we got unconditional surrender, and it didn't secure Eastern Europe. I'm saying that if they had allowed there to be conditional surrender, it could have. Right? If the war ends, let's say the Germans say, okay, we give up, there it would have been conceivable to allow those states to establish themselves, and the Soviets would have had to be the aggressors and invade and whatever. But because they were the liberators, and because we were subsidizing them, and because we just straight up told them you can have these as your sphere of influence, it was much easier for them. It would have been very different if they had to like physically invade those countries and aggressively attack them. We basically handed them to them on a plate. The Nazis killed more people at a higher rate, though. I don't know about the rates, actually. It's possible. This is I guess if you accept the 6 million number, which, whatever, let's accept it. Maybe, but so what? They also had an upper limit on what they could have killed, right? They couldn't have gone that much higher than they did. Once they'd killed all the Jews that they had in their power anyway, who else were they going to kill? Whereas there was really no upper bounds to how many, like the Soviets, their class enemies were ever expanding, and their negligence and their inability to kind of deliver material goods meant that you constantly had people dying anyway, even if there wasn't a purge. So, look, I mean, just read the Black Book of Communism, and then weigh that against everything that and just accept everything you hear about the Holocaust and the Nazis, and just assume that's all that's true. It's still, I think the Soviets are worse. I mean, in many respects, the Nazis are a reaction against the Soviets. I like to say Soviets usually. I don't know, the Soviet Union. Um, they came to power because people are like, we have to stop the communists. This is the whole why Mises gets in so much trouble, because he's like, look, if it's the choice between a fascist and a communist, I mean, it's an easy choice. What can you do? You can leave, I guess. But all right, guys. Well, I want to thank everybody for watching. It's always been fun. Maybe I'll do a book video where I just go through slowly and cover all the books, so that people can see that. So anyway, I want to thank everybody for watching, and have a good night.